Imagine if monsters invaded Earth out of nowhere. You'd be there in the bathroom doing your business and the creature pops out of the toilet. Hey guys, I'm doing a live stream today. Smash that like button for the Tob's Manhwa channel. Look at this monster that just showed up here.
Hiya, buddy.
And to make the situation even weirder, our protagonist finds an ugly old female goblin stuck in a bear trap. Good thing she wasn't stuck in a washing machine, but based on the clothes she's wearing, she must be a real hottie among goblins. At first, he didn't think about helping, but when she shows a photo of her family, that really got to the protagonist. I thought she was old, but she was actually the youngest daughter.
What the fuck?
As a reward for saving the young old goblin, he received a silver goblin pill. At first, he wasn't going to consume it, but when his window exploded and a tower appeared right next to his house, he didn't really have a choice, did he? With that, he obtained a sage status window that provides him with a guide for the best survival rates and how to progress. The system also warns him that the world will end in 15 days. How convenient. But suddenly, he is teleported inside the tower. Since he started the tutorial, he ended up getting the combat swordsman class. Now he can see his stats and even gained a sword. The tower system tells him to survive in the forest for 60 minutes and find the exit, but the sage system tells him to kill as many monsters as possible in those 60 minutes. I think the tower system is messing with me, but I can't prove it. Suddenly, a monster appears. It looks cute, but it quickly turns into Satan himself and jumps to have the protagonist for lunch. With just one sword slash, the creature went to see Jesus, and the XP went up. He quickly started hunting several of these raccoons. If environmental protection sees this, there's gonna be trouble. Finally, he managed to reach level 2 and gained 2 stat points to distribute. The problem was that the system started to glitch and readjusted the player's level. He was back to level 1. This is because he carries the weight of knowledge. Because he possesses the sage system, he will level up much slower compared to other players. In other words, that's a massive debuff.
Oh no!
He just hit level 2 but already went back to level 1. However, when he went to check his stats, the 2 points were still there, meaning this is more of an overpowered bug-like ability. It must be harder to go from level 20 to 21 than from 1 to 2, so he's going to farm way more skill points this way, right? It's like the guy is an infinite attribute farmer. Another unicorn raccoon charged with its horn, trying to attack our protagonist. In reaction, he used his swordsmanship skill and counterattacked with his sword. With extreme ease, he hit the monster, instantly defeating it. Again, he leveled up, but due to his penalty, he returned to level 1 once more. Upon opening his status window and confirming his theory, the boy smiled widely. He confirmed that even falling back to level 1, the remaining points continued to accumulate. Lee celebrated, explaining that in the normal way, the higher the level, the more experience was needed for the next level, so that penalty was like a blessing. With his remaining points, he began reasoning about the best way to distribute them. Logically, for his class, the best options were strength for stronger attacks and agility to increase speed and reflexes. Even so, he stated that the status that would favor him the most at that moment was another one, and he used everything to increase his sensitivity. In another part of the forest, he continued defeating the raccoon monsters to level up as much as possible. He reflected that those beasts, being tutorial monsters, were weak and remembered what the guide had said. We then see several defeated monster corpses around him, and Lee said the problem was the number of beasts he could encounter in that time. So he needed to level up his sensitivity as much as possible to find enemies more easily, and with his senses at level 20, he could even sense K. Suddenly, a strong, imposing red aura appeared behind our protagonist, making him completely tense, and the system informed him that by defeating all the monsters, a hidden mission had been activated. Behind him emerged a huge unicorn raccoon twice the size of the previous ones. The mission was to defeat that terrible animal, a level 2 alpha unicorn raccoon. When he was about to ask what kind of animal it was, the monster used all the muscles in its legs. Immediately, it jumped against our protagonist, aiming to attack him with its horn. Huiyan threw himself to the side to dodge the attack, and the monster hit a tree next to Lee. The boy used a roll to reduce the impact of his fall. He turned in the direction of his opponent, commenting that the beast was extremely fast and by its size looked like a rhinoceros. The beast was stuck with its horn in a tree, and Huiyan wondered if it was the tutorial boss. Lee tried to calm down, stating that the monster was much stronger than the ones he had faced, and the boss managed to free itself and turn its attention to the human. Once again, the monster charged toward our protagonist, but with Lee's senses heightened, he could perceive the creature's advance. So the boy took advantage of the animal's movement, and while it was still in the air, counterattacked with his sword, slicing the raccoon in half, affirming that it was possible to defeat it. The mission was completed, and as a reward, he received gold. Lee stated that even at level 1, his status was at level 7. The tutorial ended and he closed his eyes, affirming that he never imagined an hour could seem so long. Slowly, he began to open his eyes, celebrating that it was finally over. However, before he could be happy, Huiyan became confused when he opened his eyes completely, showing an expression of surprise. He realized he was in a hall and the entire place was filled with other people as confused as he was. Lee realized he had been teleported to another place. There, a huge loudspeaker began to emit a strange voice. The voice began congratulating everyone for completing the tutorial and explained that this was the tower's lobby and everyone there was in region C2567. Lee continued perplexed, not understanding the situation, and questioned what the voice was talking about. The boy calculated and realized that there were 15 men and 11 women in the hall and assumed that everyone there had completed the tutorial just like him. All the people began to panic and try to make phone calls with their cell phones, while Hoyeon calmed down and remained silent. He looked at his hands and mentioned that if he hadn't been informed about the end of the world, he would also be in panic. Lee clenched his fists, affirming that he would calm down and that he would certainly survive the situation. A blonde woman with green eyes showed confusion and questioned what place that was, and next to her, a short creature with long ears stated that it was the end tower. The girl didn't notice who had spoken and looking down was startled. Everyone in the room realized that there was a humanoid rabbit in a white suit. He struck a cute pose and introduced himself as the beloved cute Kun, level 55, and the manager of the lower floor. The people there were frightened by a creature acting and speaking like a human, and they began asking him numerous questions. Kun sighed and commented that it was a completely normal reaction. Next to him, a male voice called out, mentioning that he had an important question to ask, and the rabbit diverted his attention. It was Lee who had called the rabbit, and looking at the creature, he commented that if this was the end of the world, what should they do? Hearing the question, Kun was surprised and pointed at the boy, affirming that it was a great question. His cute expression began to change, and he said that all 24 players there. Then his face deformed and a scary smile appeared, stating that they would participate in a life-risking game. Everyone, including Lee, was surprised by the creature's statement and began to panic. He explained that all humans on Earth were in the tower, and that everyone would work together in each mission on each floor to climb the tower. Hearing this, Lee asked if they could return to their normal lives if they managed to climb to the top level of the tower. Returning to his original expression, the rabbit affirmed that even he couldn't know that. Our protagonist became uneasy with the response and questioned the reason for climbing the tower. Kun responded that it wasn't necessary to understand the meanings of things. He turned and began walking through the place, saying that only death awaited those who didn't climb the tower. While walking, Kun hesitated and remembered something he hadn't communicated. He turned and, exuding death, affirmed that many people had already died in the tutorial. The reality dawned on our protagonist, and he blamed himself for not thinking about it earlier, realizing that even being a tutorial, some people couldn't overcome it. With a completely terrified expression, our protagonist imagined that children and the elderly might not have survived and tried to deny that it could have happened. When Kun reached the center of the room, he raised his hands and called for everyone's attention. With a confident look, he asked if anyone was willing to try to kill him. He added that to return to his home, he needed to be killed and would reward those who helped him. Lee wondered if it was some kind of trap. Lee analyzed Kun, commenting that even though he didn't seem strong on the outside, he was still level 55 and his chances of victory were low. Nervously, he said that for now, he would retreat and observe to analyze the situation and understand everything. However, the guide emerged and suggested another situation to help our protagonist, recommending that he help Kun return to his home. Reading that, Hoyeon wondered if it was really okay to attack the rabbit, even though the system advised it. He hesitated and retreated while saying that even though the guide had never had a problem, he couldn't guarantee that doing something so suspicious would work out. Still tense, our protagonist continued reasoning and questioning what to do. Surprisingly, an unknown man with brown hair appeared and announced that he would do it. The boy seemed older and walked towards the creature, scoffing at the situation, and Lee complained about being slow. With extreme arrogance, the older man drew the sword on his back, saying he would kill the monster painfully. Without hesitation, he advanced against Kun, trying to attack him with his weapon. All the while, the rabbit remained extremely confident, and even with the attack about to hit, he still hadn't moved. However, when the blow was about to strike the monster, a huge fist hit the human's face squarely. The previously small rabbit now had a huge and muscular body, using all its strength to counterattack. Before people realized it, the man's blood flew between the blonde girl and another participant. Seeing the blood of one of the participants passing by, the woman was completely perplexed and in shock. With a terrifying and psychotic expression, Kun said he retaliated unintentionally. The people in the room, unable to believe what had happened, looked in the direction the man had been thrown. Seeing the man's body in blood, they began screaming and panicking. Everyone started running in despair, but Lee remained standing in shock. The boy was completely terrified and panicked, wondering what would have happened if it had been him. Returning to his original form, the rabbit tried to calm everyone down, saying it was all unintentional. Looking again at the guide's suggestion, he saw the blood staining his system screen, and the rabbit asked for help again to go home. Lee wondered if the guide had lied to him. Drenched in blood, Kun turned to the players with a cute expression, saying that whoever helped him would be rewarded. Seeing the scene, Lee and everyone in the room continued trembling with fear from what happened. Hoyeon began to feel nervous and questioned if the guide had lied to him. Suddenly, the sage's status window activated on its own, and Hoyoung's eye emitted a golden glow. The system opened and revealed 2 abilities that Lee possessed. We then saw that he had the sage's eye ability, which he hadn't used yet, allowing him to see the status window of all people. Seeing the new ability, he was surprised and wondered why it appeared suddenly. With the golden glow in his eyes, he turned his attention entirely to Kun, analyzing his status. Seeing the rabbit's status window, he smiled with relief, realizing that it was all a misunderstanding. While Kun continued dancing near the victim's body, asking to go home, Hoyoung raised his hand. The hand belonged to Lee, who was offering to help the rabbit, while affirming in his thoughts that the guide wasn't lying. Looking at our protagonist, the rabbit was intrigued and surprised that he was only level 1. The boy questioned whether his level would make any difference since he was just doing a good deed, and Kun replied that it wouldn't. The protagonist walked and positioned himself in front of the rabbit, who opened his arms asking to be finished. However, she interrupted him, asking him to wait, saying it was very dangerous, and that he had just seen someone being killed. The other players agreed with the woman, asking Lee not to do anything rash. Looking at the girl with a confident look, the boy affirmed that it was okay, and that he had a plan. Lee turned again to the rabbit, and while drawing his sword, he told the players they would see something very cool. Looking at the boy, Kun began to emit a frightening aura while maintaining a cold expression. He then returns to his monstrous form, and before our protagonist can attack, he charges at him. The creature quickly tries to hit Lee with a strong punch. We see a bit earlier that Lee offered to help the rabbit while thinking there was something strange about what it had said. In his thoughts, he comments that he was sure there were 25 people in that place, but Kun had said there were only 24. All of this was intentional, designed entirely to cause fear and horror among the people there. Returning to the present moment, Kun's punch had passed through Lee's head, giving the impression that it had pierced it. Seeing that scene again, the players around start to become horrified with fear. But despite everything, Lee still stands with the sword in his hands. The creature realizes what's happening and smiles. With ease and without hesitation, Lee swings his sword at the monster, cutting it in half. With a golden glow in his eyes, he affirms that the reason Kun said there were only 24 people from the beginning is that there were only 24 people from the start. We then see that the man who had been killed was just a humanoid hologram created by the rabbit. As it disintegrates with a blue glow, Kun congratulates Lee and his status window opens. It is revealed that the monster had no status and was a hologram. As he was about to disintegrate completely, Kun says that for those who possess courage, adversities will always be in their favor. And finally, the creature completely disintegrates, disappearing. Lee turns, looking at Kun's final moments, breathing a sigh of relief that he and the guide were right. After disappearing completely, a blue pill appears, falling to the ground. The players look at it and realize it is the reward Kun had mentioned, which is a status point. Lee walks over and picks up the pill in his hands while the players around him start commenting that they were surprised everything was fake. Still somewhat confused, one of the players calls our protagonist and asks how he knew. He comments that he saw blood passing by Cha, but neither her face nor her clothes were stained, so he assumed it was all a show. In his thoughts, he mentions it was better to keep an excuse. The bully Kim approaches our protagonist, trying to intimidate him, saying it's a waste for him to have that pill. In an attempt to belittle Lee, he says the boy was just lucky and would have advanced first if he had noticed. Our protagonist questions what he is talking about, and he retorts that since he was only level 1 during the entire tutorial, Lee must have been running away. The bully claims that Lee, being weak, will die at any moment, and therefore, for the good of humanity, he should hand over the pill. In his thoughts, Lee wonders if that guy was really that arrogant. But without hesitation, Lee uses the status point, saying that giving in to things was not his nature. Irritated, Kim approaches our protagonist, claiming that he was very selfish and was probably just trying to save his own skin because of his low level. Lee just ignores the man, thinking that people like him should just be avoided, but he wonders how long he can keep doing that. During the situation, the voice reappears, stating that the initial gold will be distributed, leaving all the players confused about what is happening. The voice continues and explains that they can use the gold in the store, and extra gold will be given based on the number of monsters they hunted in the tutorial. It also adds that in this area, the player with the highest initial gold amount is 7,400, and the rest of the people are shocked by that number. Junsom, one of the few players to reach level 4, said he didn't know who came in first place, but that he was amazing. It is then revealed that the one who got 7,400 gold was our protagonist, who was thinking that he wouldn't reveal it. The store opens for the players, explaining that there are 3 things they can do with the gold: buy items, upgrade their skills, or even increase their stats. He uses a good amount of his gold just to get all his stats to level 20, then finishes upgrading everything and starts upgrading his basic swordsmanship. Finally, a new outfit appears around our protagonist, who says he couldn't keep wearing his gym clothes. Suddenly, a sweet voice appears next to him, asking for permission and calling the boy. The voice belonged to Cha, and she says she would like him to give her some advice. He questions why she wanted advice from a level 1. She explains that regardless of his level, she was extremely impressed with his bravery. Looking at her stats, the boy says he had to hide his cheat and asks how much gold the girl has. She replies that she has 800. Lee asks if she likes to exercise, and the girl explains that she only walks. The boy states that her stamina points must be low. Our protagonist then says she should invest in stamina because even if she spends on items, it won't help, and the girl nods, saying she will follow his advice. The voice appears once more, stating that the first floor mission will begin soon. It adds that they will have 30 minutes to form a group of 3 people, and those who cannot will be placed randomly. Anxious because he will be judged by his level, Lee says he expected a group mission, but didn't imagine it would be so soon. Junsong starts talking, saying that since they can all see each other's levels, they could also share their classes, and with that, people began forming groups with the players they wanted. He explains that the first member of his group was Cha, and that he had no reason to refuse because she was a healer. However, all the other players gave the same response, refusing to join, explaining that even with a healer, all the players were uncomfortable with his level. One reason no one joined his group was that level 4 players are very laid back and know how to interact, forming their groups quickly. Anxious, he shows a fearful expression, saying that the last person left was, and the voice interrupts him, saying that the 30 minutes had passed and incomplete groups would be filled randomly, and the mission would begin immediately. Already in another place, we can see a beautiful and vast forest, while Lee says he was unlucky. It is then revealed that he fell into the same group as Kim, the bully, and in his thoughts, he complains about being in the same group as a parasite. Kim gets furious as Lee looks at him, and our protagonist begins to think that even though he is level 4, his personality left him without a group and wonders if cooperation between them is really possible. The boy says that at that point, it didn't matter if it was possible or not, and against his will, he would have to do everything to ensure cooperation between them. Looking at the sky with beautiful blue clouds, he feels confident, saying that all this was necessary to survive in that place. Our protagonist's group receives the mission to annihilate the kobold tribe, and after a long walk through the forest, they observe the entire village of monsters from a mountain. Kim, still with an air of superiority, tells Lee he will eliminate all the enemies alone and not to get in his way, but Hoyeon retorts that it was a team mission. This makes the bully even more irritated, calling Lee a loser, saying he was carrying the whole group and that the boy was talking too much. The boy sighs and, trying to keep the peace in the team, agrees, telling the bully he would let him carry the whole team. The 3 continue walking through the forest toward the village while Kim keeps humiliating Lee, who just listens quietly. The girl just watches the boys fight and anxiously questions whether that group will really work out. While walking, the bully starts complaining about the number of insects in the forest, and seeing all this, Lee tries to remain calm without losing his cool. During the exploration, the boy notices some insects eating fruits above them. He mentions that there were indeed many insects in that forest, but it was because they were on the mountain. But as he continues analyzing the insects, he notices something strange in their behavior. She interrupts the boy's analysis and asks if the enemies would be very strong. Lee replies that they should be stronger than the unicorn raccoons, but it shouldn't be too bad since they are only level 1. After a while, the group spots one of these kobold creatures, which resemble bipedal hyenas with extremely muscular bodies. Seeing the creature, our protagonist is shocked, noting that it doesn't resemble the unicorn raccoon they had encountered before. They hide behind some bushes, and Chase says that creature was much stronger than expected. Lee confirms, warning that they should first check the surroundings before making hasty decisions. But contrary to the entire group, a foot steps out from behind the bushes, making noise and alerting the monster. While revealing his position, Kim also humiliates Lee, saying he hides like a coward even in that situation. The bully, without hesitation, jumps on the animal, charging at it. The creature appears confused, not understanding how the human appeared out of nowhere. The bully lands a precise punch on the monster's face, saying that Lee would never get out of level 1 if he kept hiding like a worm. The other 2 members of the group are surprised by Kim's unexpected action and sudden attack. The bully appears unafraid and even excited about the possibility of fighting. Even after being hit squarely, the monster smiles, showing it wasn't seriously affected. Sha and Lee remain hidden behind the trees while Kim, in a state of fury, starts delivering multiple attacks on the kobold. The protagonist gets irritated and nervous, complaining that he didn't expect Kim to be so irresponsible and stubborn. Seeing the situation, she cannot stay still, and using her healing powers, reveals herself, stating she will also help the boy. Even with all his points and strength, the girl's buff, and delivering multiple attacks, the kobold doesn't seem to suffer much damage. Hoyeon notices and compliments Kim, saying that even though he is an idiot, he knows how to use the level advantage, and with the girl's help, he might be able to defeat the monster alone. Using the sage's eye to analyze the whole fight, he notes that the damage the kobold was taking was very low, suggesting it might have another weakness. Worried, he opens the guide, which informs him that the kobolds are passive and only attack if provoked, complaining that he entered the lion's den for nothing. He continues reading the information given by the guide, hoping to discover a potential weakness of the kobold. While scrolling down the page, he finds exactly what he wanted, surprised. Blinded by rage and hatred, Kim uses one of his abilities, but the monster easily dodges it. With the creature's dodge, the attack hits another tree, which falls on another kobold. The tree lands squarely on the creature's head, slightly crushing its skull. The beast becomes furious, and showing it has a higher level than the previous one, turns ready to attack its rival. To make matters worse, the two creatures join forces and start attacking the two. Kim realizes he has gotten into trouble and wonders where Lee is and why he isn't helping the group. Looking towards the bush where the boy was hiding, he notices he isn't there and assumes the boy had fled. Completely furious, the level 6 kobold charges at Kim with its improvised wooden club. Cha, who was only providing support for the bully, draws her sword and attacks the level 6 monster. Unfortunately for her, she stumbles on a rock and falls flat on the ground. The girl is completely horrified, realizing what would happen to her, and turns, looking at the monsters about to attack her. The beast, even more furious after being attacked with a sword, moves to kill the girl. Unexpectedly, out of nowhere, an object resembling a fruit appears on the creature's back. Someone's sword then appears and cuts the fruit, releasing a purple liquid. Lee, using his basic swordsmanship to complement the attack, slashes the kobold's neck with the purple liquid on his sword. Realizing the attack, the creature looks at the wound and sees it worsening. The purple goo that was only on the wound spreads all over the beast's body, and suddenly it completely explodes from the poison. Kim and Che are completely astonished and surprised by everything that happened in front of them. The bully, looking back and seeing the loser he ridiculed so much easily defeating one of the creatures, is surprised. Cha is extremely happy to see that Lee saved her and is okay. Our protagonist is completely confident and realizes that while the insects ate all the fruits, they ignored that one. He then invokes a poisonous apple from his inventory, which was the fruit he used. The guide had given the information that kobolds were vulnerable to poison, and Lee is happy because it was the key to easily completing the level 1 mission. Seeing the loser defeating a monster he couldn't, Kim becomes even more furious than he already was. Hoyoung goes to Cha and helps the girl up, asking if she's okay, and she promptly replies yes. The two young people start talking, and Lee apologizes for not arriving earlier. The girl says it's okay because he saved her. Before they could continue their conversation, Kim turns with veins bulging in rage on his face, calling Lee a loser. He insults our protagonist, calling him dead weight and saying he was hiding while he almost died. The boy is simply perplexed, wondering what Kim was complaining about since they defeated one of the monsters. The bully then leaves the place completely furious and irritated, and Lee questions if he was really crazy. Trying to stay calm, Lee sighs and says Kim has no sense and will struggle if left alone. In the evening, after a few hours, we see the kobold village. Kim continues fighting the monsters with his fists, saying he is recognized in the fighting scene. He continues using all of his strength and arms to try to defeat at least one of the monsters. While in the background, Lee and Che continue defeating most of the beasts with ease. Because of his honor and stubbornness, even getting beaten and not managing to hurt the animal, while Cha and Lee use the poison to make their lives easier, Kim remains determined. With his face completely bloody and injured, he says that none of those monsters will stop him and that he will get what he wants. With blood in his eyes and blinded by stupidity, he charges once more at the kobold he was fighting and tries to punch it. With no effort, the two other kids easily eliminate most of the village, practically completing the mission alone. While irritated, looking back, wondering how the two kids were easily defeating the enemies, two of the beasts approach to attack Kim. Taking advantage of Kim being distracted, one of the kobolds hits the man squarely on the head, slightly crushing his skull. Another creature arrives, and the two begin beating the poor boy without mercy. While they pierce the bully with their claw tips, he only complained about the pain. His only option is to put his hands over his head to protect himself and continue crying on the ground, begging for someone to help him. Suddenly, the attacks stop, and realizing this, Kim, still crying, opens his eyes to see what happened. He then notices that the two kobolds attacking him are completely sliced and covered in purple goo. Suddenly, the skulls of the two monsters explode, eliminating them instantly. Still lying on the ground from the attacks, he looks at the flying pieces of the monsters he couldn't defeat. In front of him, he sees Lee, his savior, extending a hand to him with the sunbeam shining behind the boy. With a smile on his face, Lee starts teasing the boy, asking how it feels to be carried by a level 1. Kim, with his face completely bruised, lifts his head and looks at his savior. With a completely changed and different expression never seen before, the boy smiles, crying with joy. He then celebrates, calling Hoyoung his partner and friend, surprising even Cha, who didn't expect that reaction from him. Finally, the group completes the mission. With the mission's end, we see the three of the group crossing a portal and returning to the lobby. Kim was downcast and stabbed with himself, wondering what he had done. He remembers that upon being saved by Lee, he knelt and swore he would serve the boy, and we see Cha congratulating our protagonist for leveling up to level 2. The bully continues brooding over what he had done, but still, being a man of his word, says he won't go back on his promise. Hoyoung, seeing the boy complaining and gesturing alone, questions why he was acting that way. Cha notices that there is no one else in the place besides them, and possibly they were the first group to arrive, and Lee says it was luck. The girl gets irritated with her friend's words, saying it was all thanks to his observation skills. Shyly, the boy retorts that without her support, everything would have been harder. At that moment, other groups start coming out of portals and arriving at the place. Lee notices that the first groups to arrive after them are the players who managed to reach level 4 even in the tutorial. Briefly analyzing, the boy assumes they probably also discover the monster's weakness and wonders if the other groups will arrive safely. Later, we see only 2 people come out of a portal, and one of them appears to be injured. The 2 fall to the ground from exhaustion, celebrating for getting out alive. She goes to the boys and asks where their group's third person is. The woman cries, remembering one of their partners being killed by a kobold, and replies that only the 2 of them survived. The voice reappears, stating that the first level mission had been completed by all groups. The blonde woman is shocked and complains, stating that some people hadn't returned yet, but the voice ignores her, informing her that a total of 6 groups had survived. 8 players did not return, and hearing this, Lee becomes apprehensive. A sad expression perpetuates his face, and in his mind he says he already imagined it would be difficult but didn't expect so many people to die in the first mission. Imagining himself in front of the tower with a pile of corpses of various people, he wonders how many more will die before they can reach the top. The narrator starts calculating the mission rewards for those who completed it and for the team that arrived first. Everyone receives 1,000 gold, and as a bonus for arriving first, Lee and his group earn 2,000, and the boy thinks that amount is low compared to the tutorial. He mentions that gold was insurance for his survival, and that he would need to save as much as possible. One of the players asks who the first group was, and our protagonist is surprised. Looking to the side, he realizes that the group that arrived second already knew, so he would have to reveal it. He was about to raise his hand when Kim spoke for him, stating that they were the ones who won. The big guy starts bragging, calling the others weaklings and asking them not to be sad. Upon hearing that, the people around seem confused, not believing that the level 2 group was really the first to arrive. The big guy gets irritated hearing all that, and with an air of superiority questions if people are disbelieving just because he arrived first. Seeing this opportunity, our protagonist laughs as he realizes the attention will be diverted from him. An air of hatred and envy fills the entire place, and people begin to complain that Lee got 2,000 more gold than them without doing anything and just being carried. And Lee realizes that even drawing all the attention, everyone would judge him by his level. Hearing that, she gets completely irritated because she knew her friend was the one responsible for them completing the mission. However, Lee asks the girl not to say anything, saying it's okay and that no one would listen or believe her. Hoyeon, with a confident air and posture, says the only way they would believe was if he showed his true value. Jumseon, now at level 8, claps his hands trying to get the attention of the other players, asking everyone to calm down and focus on what is most important for survival. Juno, a young swordsman at level 8, agrees with the boy and says they should keep moving forward to honor those who have already gone. With those speeches, everyone in the room gets excited and starts saying they will join forces to keep moving up the tower together. When everyone thought everything was fine, suddenly a blue flame lights up on a torch on top of the statue in the room. However, the beautiful blue flame torch completely changes its color, turning to a dark red and purple. All the other torches in the room start to acquire the same color, illuminating the whole place with a purple light, and the voice appears again, starting to warn of the danger. Hearing that, Lee wonders what is happening while becoming completely tense. The voice adds, informing that the survival rate of the first level in region C2565 was below average, and therefore a penalty mission is being created. Everyone in the room gets confused and a warning appears, informing that the deadly mission will start soon, making Lee and his group totally scared about it. Finally, the narrator asks everyone to choose a candidate in their mind, and the player with the most votes will fulfill the deadly mission, and they would have 5 minutes to decide who it would be. Looking at the remaining time, people start to wonder what they should do and try to understand the whole situation. However, everyone in the room realizes what their vote means, and they all start looking at the timer. They realize that being voted for is the same as death. All the people there start to get extremely nervous, trying to think about who they would vote for and what would be the best option. However, Cha tries to calm the situation by saying that if everyone votes for themselves, then no one would have to fulfill the deadly mission. But before she can continue speaking, a man shouts that maybe there's a possibility that everyone would participate in the mission if that happens. People start to get more and more distressed and nervous, realizing that time is already passing. Suddenly, a woman raises her hand pointing at someone. With his head down, Lee realizes that everyone was pointing at him and all the people in the room were looking at him. Cha starts crying, thinking that her friend might be chosen. Even Chuno, who is usually very calm, is nervous in that situation and questions whether that decision is not too cruel. Realizing the reality, even a friendly and gentle person shows their true side in a life-or-death situation. He goes to Lee and apologizes because they would have to choose someone. Lee is completely downcast and sad, saying that even though he expected this to happen, it still surprised him. Juno, trying to convince himself he is right, says he doesn't want to die and that's why he is doing this. Even so, the woman still tries to save her friend and says it is not too late, and if everyone votes for themselves and Lee votes for Juno, everything would work out. However, Hoyeon interrupts her, saying that it wouldn't work. He explains that Byong-chul has a point and doesn't know if her theory would work, and therefore, it is too risky. Despite everything still showing that he is very depressed, he says that the trust between people has already been broken and there is no other choice. He explains that as time passed, the votes above his head only increased one by one, and he is sure there was more than one reason for voting for him, but the main reason was his level. He adds that people have lost the sense that the strong should protect the weak, and Cha continues to argue with the other players. While one of the players says that he would die anyway because he is low level, Lee adds that masks fall and people reveal their true selves in this situation. With an extremely malevolent face showing his true nature, Kim votes for his friend, demonstrating that it was all a lie, and Hoyoung says it was a cruel reminder that the end of the world was really here. As soon as the time is up, the narrator states that all the votes have been counted and the portal for the deadly mission will open. A huge rift with red lighting opens, revealing itself to be the portal for the mission. In front of that terrifying portal that exuded death and pain, our protagonist becomes even more apprehensive. Everyone realizes what they have done to the poor boy and questions it was really real. Cha, seeing her friend walk towards death, starts crying. Kim just laughs at the situation, saying he wouldn't have to obey that boy anymore and this would solve his problems. Completely downcast and showing no reaction, Lee thinks that the sacrificial lamb was chosen and the altar was prepared. As he walks towards his possible death, he says he could see the expression of relief and guilt around him, and his only choice was to be the lamb for this sacrifice. Except for one reason, at the top of that altar was not death. We then see the guide's recommendation that advised him to participate in the deadly mission because he had a high chance of completing it, and then he crosses the portal. It is possible to see that on his face there was no sadness, but a smile that he was masking because by completing the mission he would receive a reward. After some time with Lee already inside the portal, some people still feel guilty about what happened while others seem not to care about the possible death the boy will face. Kim and Che are sitting side by side and suddenly a voice asks if the two are okay. The person with the voice was the boy Junsong, who was worried. He laments because even though they've known each other for a short time, like it or not, they were companions who should take care of each other. Kim, without any remorse, says he is fine and not all sorry, adding that people get what they deserve. Hearing this, Junsong asks what he means. Kim makes up a lie, saying that the only thing Lee did was try to take advantage of him, and that he got what he deserved. Horrified to hear that, Che says it's all a lie, and they only won the trial thanks to Hoyoung's skills. Kim gets angry, saying that the boy had no skills and was just lucky to find the poison. However, she doesn't let it go and retorts that if it wasn't for her friend, the bully would probably already be dead. Thinking about what the girl said, he remembers Lee easily defeating all the opponents and wonders if the boy had a skill that hit his own level. In his thoughts, he wishes the boy doesn't come back alive. Junsong just ignores their argument and says he hopes Lee is as good as Chase said. Looking at the last place the mission portal appeared, he says that if that is true, the boy might have a chance to return alive. Chev never loses hope, remembering what her friend had said. She wipes the tears from her face and affirms that she believes in him with all her strength. Hearing this, the boy smiles at the girl and says he is also sure he will come back. Now in another world, we see several dead and dry trees and various crows circling the carcasses of dead animals. Lee walks among the bodies of kobolds and realizes that this village was the one they defeated in the mission, saying it looked creepy. Happy and confident, the boy just says it's okay and activates the Sage system, opening the guide to consult it again. Seeing that the guide was recommending that he go on the deadly mission, he says he was already thinking of voting for himself if everything went wrong. A little irritated, the boy clenches his fists, remembering that Kim betrayed him and says he will still take revenge. The system notification appears, informing that the Kobold tribe's hunting group returned to the village, and we see several kobolds emerging behind our protagonist. The creatures seem furious and ready to devour whoever is in front of them. Feeling their overwhelming presence, the boy starts sweating, stating that they were all already there. We see that the whole group is being led by a huge red-skinned kobold with many scars and armor. The system notifies again, stating that the deadly mission will begin and that Lee must kill the commander and the hunting group. Seeing all their families and relatives destroyed in front of them, all the kobold group gets even angrier and charges our protagonist. The Sage system appears and the guide informs that like any other kobold, the commander is still weak against poison. Taking one of those apples from his inventory, he smashes it to make the poison spill. Still apprehensive about the number of kobolds and the high level of the boss, he starts applying all the poison to the blade of his sword. Before he even realizes it, several of those creatures charge at him armed with spears. One of the creatures then tries to pierce our protagonist's chest with one of its weapons. However, without difficulty, Lee manages to dodge, causing the animal to drop his own weapon to the ground. Taking advantage of the gap with a simple attack, he cuts off the kobold's hand, spreading the poison over the creature. With the other animals, he uses his level 2 basic swordsmanship, slicing through several of them, killing them instantly. After defeating the entire army, he sighs with relief, saying there was only one more enemy left. The boy remains confident, determined to fight the boss to test his true strength. Lee then attacks with his sword, but the commander easily defends with 2 blades. The boy gets worried because he realizes that the monster had retreated at the right time to lessen the attack, meaning he was no amateur. He says he didn't expect a monster to have such skill in combat, but that was expected in a deadly mission. However, leaving the boy confused, the creature just turns and goes in the other direction. Quickly and without hesitation, the beast starts running fiercely into the forest. Realizing that his opponent was fleeing for some reason, Lee begins to chase him. During the chase, Lee manages to land several attacks easily, mocking the monster that was just running away, saying it was very weak. Still, a little disappointed with his short battle, he was about to deliver the final blow and quickly slash the monster's back completely. However, for some reason, he sees that his last blow didn't even go through the monster's carapace and nothing had happened. The beast was just standing, looking at the sky with a red light shining in the distance. Turning and looking in the direction the monster was looking, he realizes what had happened. He sees a huge bloody red moon shining in the sky among the black clouds. With the kobold looking at it, its eyes change color and its skin becomes more rigid and stronger. The monster then easily draws one of its swords and slashes our protagonist's shoulder, who didn't even see the attack. Back in the hall, Kim is laughing, saying there is nothing they can do since Lee is probably dead. Convinced and with an air of superiority, the man said no one needed to worry because he would carry everyone through the rest of the floors. Shay is still praying, asking for her friend to return safely. Annoyed that no one is paying attention to him, the boy starts intimidating Cha, saying there is no point in praying because the man is already dead. The girl gets completely furious, standing up and saying that even with the world in that state, the boy should have a little conscience. She asks what the big guy would do if Hoyang returns safely, and he retorts that there is no possibility of the boy coming back alive. Suddenly, surprising everyone there while the two are arguing, a portal appears. Feeling the energy and light coming from the portal, the girl realizes what it means. All the players who were talking turn, incredulous at the sight they are witnessing. Some show surprise and others extreme relief as they see that even injured, Lee was coming out of the portal. As he walks towards the other players, the voice states that the one chosen to complete the deadly mission has survived. We go back a bit in time before Hoyang managed to complete the mission, and the guide informs him that he should be careful because the commander's abilities would increase when his eyes turned red. While enduring the commander's fierce and deadly attack, the boy just wondered what those red eyes meant. Injured, he walks backward with his HP running out and his life on the brink of death, saying he should stop the bleeding. He sees the beast charging fiercely at him and realizes that if he lands an attack, he will win the fight. Blinded by fury, the animal continues attacking like a triceratops, charging at our protagonist while he wonders what to do. When it was about to hit our protagonist, he is completely desperate, looking for what to do. Then the animal uses its blade to try to hit Lee's chest and kill him. Even nervous, the boy manages to dodge, throwing himself to the ground and getting up right after. He realizes that the beast had managed to pierce the tree as if it were a piece of paper. Out of nowhere, a light bulb goes off in his head and he realizes something. He states that while a sword may not be able to cut through a wall, a nail can easily pierce it. Remembering his previous fights, he realizes that subconsciously he considered that the sword was only meant to cut and not to pierce. Seeing that there was a possibility of victory, he says he will try, and the beast charges at him again. Lee uses his entire body movement and counterattacks the animal to pierce and finish it off completely. The animal uses all the strength in its legs and jumps at our protagonist, trying to stab both blades into him. However, he uses all his skills and concentrates the attack on the animal's shoulder, piercing and infecting it once more with poison. Realizing that it worked, he celebrates for having defeated the monster. A new skill emerges, and he receives a system notification informing him that he acquired the stab skill, and the mission finally ends, freeing him. Now, in the present moment, we see someone running towards Hoyang quickly. The boy is slightly startled but realizes it was his friend Cha who was running to hug him. However, the girl is interrupted and someone quickly pushes her away with great force. Having a light and fragile body, the girl rolls away, being thrown far. When she stops rolling, she is extremely confused, not understanding what had happened. We then see that Kim, the big guy, was hugging our protagonist. Even against his will and with a look of contempt, he says he had faith from the beginning that his friend Hoyang would surely return. Completely against his will, Kim says that a mission like that would never defeat Lee, and the boy just wished to punch him. Interrupting the reunion of the two fake friends, a voice calls our protagonist. It was Byung-cheol, and in disbelief he asks Hoyang if he really managed to complete the deadly mission. The man continues speaking, saying he is happy to see the boy well, but if he managed to clear the mission, he must have gained a lot of experience. But if that happened, why does his level still remain at 2? Hearing this, the people in the room start gossiping about what happened and trying to find ways to belittle our protagonist. Hearing this, Lee fills with anger but tries to stay calm, saying he thought he had gotten used to it. Stating that the world wants the weak to remain weak, he remembers his past when he was a child and got a perfect report card. Even achieving that, all the children and friends in his class began to despise his achievements, assuming he had cheated because he was just an orphan. It was as if society didn't want a worm to squirm, and the players continue assuming he just hid or fled. Everyone wants it to stay that way so they can crush and trample the worms, and Lee relates that he understood it well because people don't easily change their perspective. While trying to swallow all the pent-up anger, he comments that he needs to do something. However, a voice interrupts everyone who was murmuring. The voice belonged to Cho, who was furious, asking why even after everything, people continue to doubt her friend. She walks up to Lee and affirms that everyone there knew nothing and was just talking nonsense. Kim then follows suit and takes the lead for his lord. With a completely different personality, the boy snorts and agrees with Cha, saying she was right and that the others broke the mood. The man continues displaying his muscles and strength, asking if they had lost their senses, and Lee thinks Kim was the most senseless there. Lee observes his two companions protecting and defending him even though everyone in the room was against him. He smiles, relieved to finally have someone on his side, thinking that now he is more at ease. The boy comments that he needs to survive in the tower, and to earn the others' trust, he needs to show something convincing. Walking to the center of the room, the boy shouts, calling everyone's attention and saying he needs to show something. Hoyang reveals that he obtained the unyielding sword, which was of rare level and belonged to the mission boss. The people who were judging are impressed by the strength of that item. Jumsong approaches the group and says he is impressed that Lee kept the poison apple with him and that Che was right about him. He adds that the item was a great reward for their survival. Hearing this, Lee completely changes his expression and mocks the boy's phrase. With a smile, he states that it seems everyone there had forgotten their actions. With a completely different and imposing posture, he continues, saying that everyone there almost caused his death, leaving everyone in the room perplexed and silent. Seeing that situation and the discomfort of the other players, Cha and Kim just remain silent. Shimno bites his lips as if holding back something stuck and is about to explode. The young man agrees with our protagonist without hesitation. Lowering his head with a sad expression, he says he was trying to convince himself that it was the best option, but in the end, it was all selfishness. He continues explaining that voting for Lee just because he had the lowest level was the same as turning the boy into a target, and everyone in the room remains silent. Then the boy bows to the protagonist and deeply apologizes. While in tears, the boy says he is truly happy that Lee returned alive. After the boy's speech, the other players are completely ashamed and Hoyang remains silent. Interrupting the apology, one of the players dismisses it and says it wasn't necessary, and that Lee returned with a rare item, so it's okay. Hearing the woman's insensitivity, Juno gets irritated and asks how she could be like that. He calls the girl and asks if she didn't feel guilty for what she did, and the girl retorts, saying he couldn't argue because he was the first to vote. Lee interrupts the discussion, putting his hand in front of Juno and starts explaining why he said that. The boy says he didn't say it to reprimand or judge anyone, but to prevent situations like this from happening again. He says that everyone should have realized during the vote that the tower is trying to divide them. It is provoking distrust and conflicts among them just to amuse itself, while watching everyone walk to their ruin. The players are in shock when they realize the reality. Hoyang continues determined, saying that his return alive from the mission was an opportunity because it proved that their actions can challenge the tower's intentions. Shansong goes to him and asks if Lee has a plan for the future, and the boy retorts that he will look for ways for more people to survive and continue climbing the tower. Looking at the sky, he affirms that they will climb higher and higher, and when they one day reach the end. With strong hope in his eyes, he concludes by saying that then they can have their lives back. Hearing that beautiful speech, the players also fill with hope, believing a good future. Che also says that for that to happen, everyone there has to join hands and work together. Proud of his colleague's phrase, our protagonist agrees, and Juno just watches the scene. He is radiant with happiness, yet tears fall from his eyes, thinking that Lee is extremely generous and that he shouldn't have judged him. Unfortunately, to everyone's sadness, a voice appears in the room, and when they look, it is another hologram of Kum Kum. The rabbit laments and says that the new mission will be a survival game. Seeing the creature there again, people question why he is there again. Lee then realizes what it is about and asks Kum Kum if he really is referring to. Kum Kum congratulates the boy for realizing quickly and continues the phrase Lee was going to say. With a terrifying and scary expression, he says that the level 2 mission will be among the 15 players present in that place. A battle royale, and hearing that, all the hope the people had falls apart and despair takes over. The rabbit strikes a cute pose again, saying that since they are at a low level, this is just an appetizer and they should enjoy it, and he says he will explain the rules. The first rule is that there will be 16 players and 16 doppelgangers in the mission, a total of 32 people. The second rule is that the condition to pass is that all the doppelgangers must be eliminated. He informs that the doppelgangers will have the same status and memories as the real ones. And the most important third rule is that there is no reward for a player who kills a doppelganger, but if a player kills another player, they can get points or gold. In other words, depending on your character, that mission could be an opportunity to evolve. One of the players complains, but Kun Kun just ignores it, snapping his fingers and explaining that every 30 minutes if there are no deaths. Everyone will be summoned to the hall to face a great disaster, and a purple light falls on an altar in the middle of the room. The purple lightning transforms into a gate, and a huge hand begins to emerge from the portal. Terrified, all the survivors despair and start running away from the beast. Lee looks and sees that the monster is a gigantic and terrifying ogre, whose level even he cannot see. Our protagonist's expression is nothing but despair, and he remains in shock, looking at the beast. The boy is in complete despair, wondering if Kum Kum really expects them to fight against that. An explosion happens after that. Meanwhile, Lee was protecting his companions. thinking that it is a literal catastrophe. The other guy, desperate, asks if this is true because they had only gone on the first floor mission. That's why he wanted to know how they would face this, and the other girl responds that she doesn't want to die. Lee thinks this is bad, realizing that everyone is in panic. After that, the creature advances toward the group. The other boy was about to be attacked, but Lee saves him, saying that the second floor mission hasn't even started yet, so he wants to know the meaning of this. Looking to the side, he begins to observe that rabbit, thinking that it was just putting on a show to emphasize how serious the mission penalty was, which means this is just a taste of what was coming next. At that moment, another explosion happens and his companions were apparently hit. Meanwhile, the rest of the group was doing what they could against the giant creature. However, nothing could stop it from attacking. Lee wonders if that creature wasn't just meant to show off and if it was really trying to kill them. The other girl, healing her group, warns that she is running out of mana, and Lee thinks that since no one has died yet, it's only a matter of time. The monster then attacks again, and Lee asks everyone to move away, thinking that if he can't stop the attack, everyone will be killed. And if he used his dagger skill with that indomitable sword, it might be possible to defend against the attack. Summoning an aura into his dagger, the protagonist tries to defend against that hand, which he apparently managed to do. Everyone, seeing what Lee had done, is surprised, and the boy, meanwhile, is confused. Even so, this was great because they had managed to get out of that situation. People start cheering for Lee, who meanwhile is wondering if that dagger is really that powerful. Even so, that attack seemed different from the usual. The system notifies that he had used an ability beyond his limits and therefore would fall into a state of exhaustion for 3 minutes. The boy then begins to feel the side effects and at that moment collapses unconscious. Sometime later, the boy was already opening his eyes and the system informs him that his state of exhaustion had already passed. His group, worried, asked if he was okay, and the other man says he was deeply moved, because he couldn't believe that Lee was so humble despite having that amount of power. Lee asks what happened to the ground along with the monster, and the guy responds that, as he could see, that rabbit had already sent them away. The rabbit says that was just a taste of what would happen next, wondering if that hadn't been enough. The fact that a death had to happen every 30 minutes could mean that the person beside him might try to kill him. Opening a portal, the creature says that this was all. At that moment, it disappeared from that place. Lee, seeing that, becomes very furious, thinking that he hadn't expected that rabbit to say those words so shamelessly. Even so, he thought he had no choice. Thus, time keeps passing. The other guy says that if they don't manage to identify the doppelgangers, they will end up killing each other. The other man says that's why they need to come up with a plan, wondering what they should do to solve that situation. Then Lee calls the group, saying that he already knew the solution for this. The other girl asks what he had in mind. Lee responds that during that mission only he will go to that place, and that's why they shouldn't do anything else while placing their location on the second floor. And if, besides him, someone starts attacking people, they should all attack at once because that person would be a doppelganger. The other man asks if that was really his plan. The girl says that she understood he was strong due to his level, but still she didn't agree with such a reckless plan. Lee asks if she remembers what those rabbits had said earlier, because there is no reward for killing a doppelganger, but if someone kills their companion, they gain status points. The objective may seem to be fighting against their doppelgangers, but what the tower was actually trying to do was make them kill each other. That's why he will no longer let the tower make a fool out of him, and because of that, this was the best way to avoid that. However, that woman was still not convinced, asking how this was the best way. Then another guy raises his hand, saying that he agrees because this way they could limit unnecessary casualties. If he insists on playing that role, it means he has some way of identifying the doppelgangers. Hearing this, Lee gives a smile, thinking that it was obvious that it was true. As time passes, the system announces that the second floor mission has begun and that at least one murder must occur in the next 30 minutes. While walking, the other guy says they shouldn't do anything besides reaching the highest point, questioning why they should follow Lee's orders. At that moment, the guy seems to sense something. Without wasting time, he hides, realizing that it was Lee. The boy then responds that his shoulders are wider than the tree so he could see him. The guy putting on an axe says that it was just Lee and that he thought he was a doppelganger, but at that moment, he ends up being murdered. Sometime later, the scene cuts to Lee, who was analyzing a strategy guide stating that anyone who reached a certain perception level would gain a superior ability. Lee thinks this is perfect because he was nervous after speaking in front of everyone about being able to differentiate doppelgangers. Starting to increase his perception points, he wonders what number he should reach to obtain the reward. At that moment, the system announces that he's the first player to reach 50 perception points and has acquired a superior ability. Because of it, all 5 of his senses would improve drastically, allowing him to identify and distinguish beings within a certain range. Lee please thinks that it cost him half of his gold, but he finally got this ability. At that moment, the boy starts to feel something, and recognizing that voice, he realizes someone is in front of him. It was that same guy from before, asking why he had to follow Lee's orders. Lee, surprised, thinks that he is 500 meters away, but can see him clearly as if he were right in front of him. At that moment, he begins to sense a very strong odor, wondering where the smell was coming from. Realizing that it was coming directly from the guy, he deduces that he was probably a doppelganger. Sometime later, the scene cuts back to the present with that guy lying on the ground, and the system announces that a doppelganger has been killed. Lee, surprised, thinks that the guy had pretended to be a real person until his last breath. Either way, now that he was capable of identifying doppelgangers, the only thing left was for everyone to listen to him. Thanks to that guy who had agreed with him, most people seemed convinced. It was impossible for everyone to do the same thing, so he hoped nothing bad would happen while everyone was moving. At that moment, the system announces that a player has been killed. Lee, surprised, thinks that either other doppelgangers have started attacking or another player might have done it. Wondering who the hell had done it, he still couldn't be sure. Without wasting time, the boy starts running, determined that he just needs to catch that bastard as fast as possible. Climbing a tree, the boy is frustrated, thinking that while he was dealing with another doppelganger, a player was killed. Observing the surroundings, he starts searching for the murderer, and at that moment, notices something. That meanwhile, another player was lying on the ground, and in front of him was apparently a doppelganger. Without wasting time, the boy rushes toward the creature, which soon after returns to its human form. Even so, he was going to kill it without any mercy, stating that he had thought his doppelganger would be the most likely to start killing people, but something completely unexpected had happened. Besides that, he was happy to have caught it before more people died, but still, the person who had been killed should rest in peace. Observing the guy's body, Lee realizes that something is wrong because the doppelganger's weapon was a long sword, and that wound hadn't been caused by a sword. At that moment, Lee realizes something and sees someone aiming at him with an arrow, assuming that the murderer was someone else. When he activates his ability, he realizes that the guy wasn't a doppelganger, but a player. Moreover, he had probably been injured by his own doppelganger. Lee, approaching the guy, realizes that it was Ju Seong and asks if he was okay. However, Ju Seong tells him to stay still, stating that he trusted the boy, but since he had no way to identify doppelgangers, he needed a guarantee. Pointing his sword, Lee says that what he had just killed was a doppelganger, questioning if the other person had been him. Hearing what Lee said, Ju Seong remains silent and then realizes that it was the real Lee. As he starts losing consciousness, he asks the boy to be careful with his doppelganger. Sometime later, the scene cuts to Lee carrying that guy, where soon after he regains consciousness and apologizes, saying that if he hadn't lost that bastard, no one would have been killed. Now he was just getting in his way and thinking that someone with his face was killing people was something very bad. However, Lee says that it wasn't his fault and they were all victims of the tower, so they should just focus on getting out of there alive. At that moment, our hero notices something and other people from his group appear. The other girl says that they were finally safe and that she was so worried when she saw that 2 players had been killed. Approaching Ju Seong, she asks if he is okay because she's going to heal him. However, Lee interferes in the situation, asking the boy to step back because those are doppelgangers. Ju Seong in turn asks if he was sure about that. At that moment, those creatures reveal their true form. Without wasting time, they start advancing toward the two. The other guy asks if he is still angry about the whole death mission thing. Right after, Ju Seong says that he shouldn't worry because he will take care of the other doppelganger. In the midst of that situation, Lee is surprised, wondering why those doppelgangers appeared in front of him again. At that moment, the other girl charges at the protagonist from behind. He barely manages to dodge the attack, but even so, he had no time to think because the other monster was already above him. Again, Lee manages to evade with a backflip. However, when he lands on the ground, he notices an arrow coming toward him. The boy barely manages to dodge it, and a voice says that it was a close call. Then it is revealed that it was Ju Seong who shot that arrow. The scene cuts to moments before Lee met Ju Seong. Meanwhile, he was watching Lee defeat the doppelganger. Grabbing an arrow, he places it on his shoulder because his hobby was luring people in as bait. Returning to the present, Ju Seong says that he accidentally revealed his true self, so he wants to know how Lee feels now. Perhaps betrayed, discouraged, or even furious. However, as a response, our hero simply gives a smile, because he was wondering when he had shown his true colors, but this was worse than he expected. Hearing this, Ju Seong says that he apparently already expected this. A flashback of when Lee was helping the guy appears, and the boy responds that his eyes allow him to see other people's stats and he had raised his significantly. Ju Seong, surprised, says that Lee is fascinating and that the tower probably favors him. Lee asks why he is doing this and if, by any chance, the gold points and stats were really that tempting, at least enough to take people's lives. The other guy then asks if a reason was really necessary, because since killing people resulted in rewards instead of penalties, that world was wonderful. Shooting an arrow, he asks how he could not kill others. In the midst of that situation, Lee thought that he had been forced to do this. Dodging the arrow, he states that he was definitely wrong, because he had simply satisfied his desires at that exact moment. Besides, he was just a serial killer who deserved to be killed. At that moment, the other guy rushes at the protagonist, but he manages to dodge. Jumping, he begins to receive another attack, but successfully blocks it with his dagger, thinking that he was using the same trick. Another arrow is fired at Lee, but he also manages to dodge it, wondering if the guy still had more tricks up his sleeve. Then those doppelgangers approach the boy. Lee thinks that a long-range fighter made the group even stronger. That's why the essence of this group was impeccable, along with the companion who was healing the others. Lee says that he doesn't know how he was able to control the doppelgangers, but it seemed that he had prepared this for a long time. Ju Seong says that these were just natural preparations since he was going to make a big catch. Even so, the boy was resisting a lot, and because of that, he preferred it this way. Because the more he fights, the more pain he feels in his death at the end. Meanwhile, Lee listens to those words in silence. Then, Ju Seong is about to fire more arrows, asking what Lee was doing. Right after, the three of them charge at the boy all at once. Meanwhile, he remains motionless. However, the system announces that his superior senses have been activated. Lee thinks that those three were finally in a favorable position. The boy then begins analyzing the stats of all the doppelgangers. At that moment, he manages to dodge all the attacks and counterattacks against the other doppelganger. Without wasting time, the other doppelganger seems to be casting some sort of magic, but he manages to evade it. Defeating her, he thinks that all of this was very meaningless. Then the system announces that a doppelganger has been killed and that another murder must be committed within 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Ju Seong was silently watching everything. At that moment, he knelt on the ground, extremely shocked by what had happened. With tears on his face, he begs Lee for mercy, because he had been temporarily blinded by the rewards he could get from killing others. His ability was incredible, making him feel like he had to follow Lee, and so he crossed a line that should never have been crossed. That's why he at least wanted to be forgiven. Hearing those words, Lee kneels, and at that moment, that guy counterattacks with an arrow. However, Lee was already expecting this and immediately finishes him off. Even so, he is surprised because he had just killed a human being. Right after, the red system message appears, informing him that he had killed a player who followed the path of an assassin and gained the opportunity to follow the same path. After that, a red aura begins to surround him. The system announces that if he followed the assassin's path, he would receive stat bonuses along with support from the doppelgangers. A tremendous reward also awaited him after that. At that moment, a black shadow appears, starting to take shape. Lee, analyzing everything, thinks that this was the reason why Ju Seong was able to control all the doppelgangers. However, the most important thing was that one of the benefits could be a legendary piece of equipment or even a legendary level skill. With all these ridiculous benefits, it would be something very tempting. Killing doppelgangers had already been bad enough. He was able to defeat them without hesitation because he already knew they weren't human beings. If he followed that path, he would have to deal with other players more frequently, and he was sure that among them, there would be others who would also choose the assassin's path. Thus, the protagonist ends up refusing the offer. After all, he could become a horrible assassin like that person. Sometime later, the scene cuts to another location. He had apparently already reunited with his companions. The other guy, who had already had his doppelganger defeated, asks why he took so long. Meanwhile, Lee thinks that becoming an assassin like that might not be so bad. Approaching the group, he says that he knows his request may be difficult to understand. Even so, he would appreciate it if everyone did as he said. The other guy asks what they should do and whether he was really capable of identifying the doppelgangers. Lee responds that he truly is capable of doing so, thanking everyone for listening to his request. However, that voice was not Lee's, and our hero, looking back, is surprised because his doppelganger was there. After that, the whole group is shocked, wondering who they should really believe. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that this is a headache and that's why he wanted to take care of his doppelganger beforehand. However, Ju Seong had already completely ruined his plan. Right after, both Lees begin staring at each other, and the real Lee thinks that this has now become a battle of intelligence between him and his doppelganger. The other guy says he doesn't know which one is real, but they should explain what is happening, and whether it's true that they had defeated the doppelgangers as claimed. That's why he wants to know who really took their lives. Hearing all this, Lee remains silent, thinking that there are currently 8 individuals who have been killed or whose doppelgangers have been defeated, and that once he reveals the 5 he had killed, the remaining members would automatically be identified as players. In other words, he could prove that he was a player. However, something unexpected happens because the doppelganger also states the same names of the people he had defeated. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that he already knew this would happen. At that moment, the doppelganger starts speaking again, saying that those 2 were members of his group during the first floor mission and asking if he discovered their 2 doppelgangers and then killed them, questioning what the probability of that happening was. Lee, surprised, realizes that the doppelganger started arguing before he could. The group then begins discussing whether that was really true. Right after, the doppelganger says that, according to the other guy, the Ju Seong they had now was a doppelganger. Look, they already knew very well that this person had a higher level than them and was practically their leader, encouraging them every step of the way, which meant that he was admitting that he had ended up killing the real Ju Seong. It wasn't just hard to believe that he had been killed, but also if that were really true, there was no way to trust an assassin. The group, shocked, was listening to all of this. The doppelganger thinks that the real Ju Seong is indeed dead, but by now, everyone was already on his side. Now there was only one thing left to do. saying that he had revealed his identity in haste to protect his allies, that guy was truly a doppelganger. Without wasting time, the group begins drawing their weapons, saying that enough had been said, and so they would kill that fraud immediately. However, the other guy, frustrated, says that if they were saying that, it meant they also didn't trust that he was a real person. A discussion then begins, and the protagonist, meanwhile, listens in silence, thinking that he was almost praising himself because he had found the best strategic response to the situation he had been given. Right after, the boy starts approaching his group, affirming that he had indeed killed Ju Seong. The doppelganger asks if he was really going to give up. Lee, in turn, thinks that there was something even his doppelganger could not possibly know. Attacking Ju Seong's doppelganger, our hero states that he was already a traitor. The doppelganger, frustrated, asks what he was planning to do and why he was acting so recklessly when he had no way out. However, the other guy asked them to wait because if Ju Seong was really a traitor, he wanted to know what Lee meant by that. Because if his line of thinking was correct, the person who just attacked Ju Seong was actually Lee. Thus, the protagonist gathered all the players who had gained the upper hand over the doppelgangers. Because as soon as a doppelganger kills a player, its identity is revealed, meaning they couldn't just start attacking. Since Lee could identify them, the doppelganger would have to prove its identity, which meant that the protagonist really could have killed someone. Without hesitation, our hero replies that he was right because Ju Seong was a demon disguised as a good person. However, the other girl standing nearby didn't seem to agree, wondering how that idiot could insult Ju Seong. With a look of hatred, she charges at the protagonist, saying she would never forget this. But at that moment, that girl is attacked, asking why this was happening. Looking back, she realizes that it was actually Ju Seong who had done it, and as a result, a player had been killed. In the midst of that situation, our hero is shocked because the guy was still able to move. Ju Seong then bursts into laughter, saying that was exactly the kind of expression he wanted to see. At that moment, another guy appears, successfully defeating Ju Seong. Apologizing for not trusting Lee before, he asked him to give any order necessary. The group, seeing all of that, states that the real Lee was actually the other one. Without wasting time, the group draws all their swords, asking the boy to give orders on what they should do. Various thoughts begin running through the protagonist's mind, making him realize this was truly different from before. Right after, he says he has a suggestion for everyone. But at that moment, that doppelganger reveals its true form, charging our hero. However, he manages to dodge the attack. Even so, he continues giving his suggestion to the group, ordering them to gather all their gold and use it to increase all their stats, thinking that if they were able to do that, the doppelgangers wouldn't be strong enough to fight against them anymore, because they would all be much stronger than they were before. The stats of their doppelgangers were based on the moment they entered the second floor mission, which meant that after increasing their stats with their gold, they would be able to complete the mission without any issues. Right after, the other guy says that more people could have made it out alive if it weren't for that bastard Ju Seong. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that Secheng was probably much more affected because he was in the same group as them. Even so, Lee himself was also discouraged because his goal was to clear the second floor without any casualties. Even so, the other groups in that tower must be in much worse situations because he was sure that no one else had a strategy guide like he did. So there must be more people turning to the assassin's path. The battles would only get more intense from this point forward, and yet his power was still minuscule. That's why there had to be a reason why he was given the strategy guide ability. It wasn't as if he was a genius or anything, but as long as there were people who trusted him like now, he would do his best to keep everyone alive. Right after, Secheng stands before the protagonist, beginning to express his gratitude because they owed their survival to him. But the protagonist replies that it was all thanks to them for following his suggestions. Secheng says that Lee was still only at level 2 despite all his achievements, and that he must have some kind of special ability affecting his level. In the midst of that situation, Lee thought he was impressed by Secheng's description and judgment, and he would probably be of great help from then on. After that, Secheng bows to the protagonist, saying that he would like to apologize for having doubted him. Moreover, he had greatly underestimated him, but Lee replies that it wasn't necessary. Laughing, the other guy says that they had terrible judgment, and for that reason, they should have bet on the boy from the beginning, just as he had done. Secheng says that this might sound shameless coming from him, but he thought it would be better for the boy to leave from then on. Hearing this, our hero is surprised, and in response, he smiles and accepts the offer. Sometime later, the scene cuts to another location, and everything seemed to be going well. Our boy was observing a bush, and after that, he managed to take down another doppelganger. Sometime later, the mission had already been completed, and everyone was going to receive gold according to their level of participation. The whole group seemed very happy with the amount of gold they had earned, as it was more than 500. However, some people had earned even more because that other guy had managed to get a total of 2,000 gold. Meanwhile, Lee was silently watching everything, thinking that it seemed like everyone received a good reward. All of this because they had followed his instructions. With the 12,500 gold he had earned, the boy seemed satisfied. At that moment, he noticed something because the system announced that his ranking in the item shop had increased. Lee, surprised, realizes that this is how it worked because he needed to increase his ranking in the item shop if he wanted to buy rarer items or unique level gear. Without wasting time, the boy immediately makes a purchase worth 5,000 gold, which was apparently a beginner's sword technique that was already at level 3. Lee thinks that he had already used a sword technique beyond his level without realizing it, and for that reason, using such a strong technique for just 5,000 gold was a small price to pay. But in any case, he no longer needed to make any more purchases. Thus, our hero transfers some points to the girl beside him. She asks why he suddenly did that. However, the protagonist asks her to accept it because, thanks to her, they had managed to defeat all the kobolds and doppelgangers in battle, and it would have been much more difficult if not for her help. Moreover, that was the reason they were able to laugh and trust each other despite that place forcing them to kill others to survive. Her presence was already important because she wished to save people even in a world like that. Hearing all of this, the girl remains silent, and soon after, she calls the boy by his name. With a bright expression, she promises that she will become much stronger. After that, Lee transfers gold to another guy, telling him to do his best from now on. As the boy starts walking away, he thinks that at the very least, the guy proved to be quite useful. Right after, the guy calls the protagonist again, saying that he would do anything for him from that day on. Sometime later, the scene shifts to another location and Lee is drawing his sword, thinking that it was finally time to test his superior level technique. Then the system announces that the third floor mission had begun, which was a siege battle where they would face players from other districts for the first time. One of the requirements to complete the mission was for their group to be designated as an attack team and then capture the castle while occupying the altar. The time they had to complete the mission was 24 hours, and the penalty for mission failure would not be disclosed. At that moment, the system gives the protagonist an item, a returned stone, because he had obtained a temporary item on the third floor. Lee then begins analyzing the artifact. The group, surprised, starts receiving those stones, and in the midst of that situation, they wonder if they really had to kill more people again. Right after, our hero calls the guy and drawing his dagger reminds him that he had said he would do anything Lee wanted. Thus, time passes and the guy was apparently climbing the mountain. Meanwhile, he complains that it was really difficult and that Lee could have at least told him that he couldn't die during this mission. The system announces that on this floor, if someone dies, they will return to their initial location through the returned stone. Then the boy stands in front of a gate, saying that it was worth destroying everything. Hitting the gate, the system announces that the castle door's durability had decreased to 81%. With the guy's series of attacks, the percentage begins to drop drastically, and after that, the castle gate is finally destroyed. The guy, full of confidence, says that this was nothing compared to his power. But something surprising happens as the gate starts regenerating rapidly. Looking to the side, the guy stays alert because there were 2 men on the walls nearby. And observing the altar, he notices that about 10 people were there. The guy remembers what the protagonist had said, telling him to make sure not to kill anyone so they could understand what the returned stones did. He thinks that Lee had warned him not to kill people and that he couldn't just run away from an enemy. Because of that, he could simply take care of all of them. But at that moment, the guy is attacked. Confused, he wonders what happened. After that, the boy apparently begins to lose his senses. Looking ahead, he realizes that it was that girl who had fired the attack. Then the scene cuts to the guy explaining all of this to Lee, saying that the other girl was firing some magical bullets that were really quite different. Lee thinks that a pistol is not the type of weapon they had access to at that point, and as proof, even Seching, who was a professional soldier, wasn't able to use one. Because of that, the only plausible explanation was the benefits of being an assassin, which could make that battle much more difficult than usual. Right after, the other girl places a hand on Lee's shoulder, asking him not to worry because she would be there to heal everyone if something happened. The whole group determined says that they are also calm, just waiting for the hero's orders. Hearing all of this, the boy feels happy, saying that they would defeat them soon. Thus, time passes and the scene cuts to a man crying. Above him, a girl seems to be admiring the moon, and many people feared her. The scene cuts back to Lee, who is activating all of his abilities, and while observing the castle, realizes that there were only 2 people on the walls, just as the red-haired guy had said before. Right after, the frustrated guy says that he had already returned once again. The medic asks if they weren't going to test what the returned stone does by watching that guy, but Lee responds that they could only suspect, but they wouldn't be able to confirm. Without wasting time, the archers begin to prepare, and at that moment, our hero starts moving. When the arrow is fired, Lee manages to intercept all of them. Jumping onto that guy's shoulder, he charges toward the castle. After taking down both of them, he warns that they had only one chance. The other guy, watching from afar, warns that if they didn't take the castle immediately, they would realize how the return stones worked, so they had to win no matter what. Approaching the castle gate, the other guy says that this was his chance. The castle doors break with just 5 of his punches, mentioning that they shouldn't rush him. Right after, the guy is about to strike the door again, but at that moment he is attacked, and the system announces that the castle doors would no longer be reset. Seeing all the commotion from above, Lee wonders what was happening. Meanwhile, the other guy is laughing, saying that he doesn't know why he hadn't killed them yet, but if he continued like that, he would never survive with that kind of attitude. Meanwhile, the protagonist group is watching their enemy inside the gate. That girl, without wasting time, starts aiming with her weapon. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that he had assumed it could just be a coincidence, but that person was really an assassin. Moreover, the girl was level 13, making him wonder if she had gone on a killing spree on the second floor or something similar. At that moment, the girl fires her weapon, hitting our hero directly. After that, Lee begins to take cover from the castle and, drinking a potion, thinks that he never expected her to shoot from that distance. Even so, he was already glad that he had taken more precautions. Observing the girl's stats, he realizes that each magic bullet seemed to cost her at least 10 mana. Moreover, if she was at the same rank in the item shop as he was, she still wouldn't have access to mana recovery items. Our hero then charges toward the girl, who, without wasting time, begins observing him to prepare her next shot. Descending from the top of the castle, our hero thinks that it meant the girl only had 13 bullets. With his group gathered, the boy is determined, realizing that they really could be capable of defeating her. But at that moment, something surprising happens as a purple light appears. It ends up hitting one of Lee's companions. A flashback then appears with the boy asking how they would reach the altar if their enemies had a weapon. Lee warns that if their bullets were capable of putting that guy in a critical state with a single shot, they were probably magic bullets. The other boy concludes that it would depend on how much MP their enemy had, and the protagonist replies that he was correct. And for that reason, he had to at least endure one shot. Determined, the boy begins healing himself. Lee's group was still trying to charge at the girl with a gun. From afar, that blonde girl was healing them, which was truly very useful. Meanwhile, that assassin was watching everything in silence. Right after, she kicks a few soldiers, ordering them to do something. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that this would be the turning point, because if a battle began, people would be taken down, and that's why they needed to reach the altar. At that moment, the other guy charges at Lee, but he manages to dodge the attack, counterattacking the one who was beside him. A magic bullet heads toward Lee, but his companion defends the attack. Meanwhile, that girl is surprised, realizing that these people are returning from death, supposing that they were reacting to her shots. Firing another bullet at Lee's companion, she thinks that these people are quite interesting. Seeing what happened, our hero becomes furious, because in the end, each one of them was already dying. That woman surely knew that they were capable of returning from death. Even so, he wanted to know how she could keep that expression while taking people's lives. Then Lee seems to use one of his abilities. With a leap, he charges at the girl. After that, their attacks collide. The scene cuts to another guy saying that they were doomed because his big brother had already reached the altar. Charging at the group, he declares that they didn't need to hold back anymore. Meanwhile, the girl fighting the protagonist asks what he was to be so strong, only level 2. However, he replies that it was very strange for her to be level 13 so soon. Hearing this, the girl falls silent, and at that moment, the ground begins to glow. The system announces that he had occupied the altar, and for that reason, needed to remove the opposing player from there. Observing the situation, Lee thinks that he needed 3 people to fully occupy that place. Before that, he needed to get rid of that girl, so he began attacking her again. And while the girl was being attacked, she wonders how the boy was able to react to her shots so quickly. Then Lee tries to attack again, but the girl dodges with a jump. Reacting quickly, she fires again with her weapon, but it had no effect, as if the boy could predict everything. A swordsman like that guy was one of the strongest players in his area, and his name was Junio. He was once called a table tennis genius. In a professional match where a rally was happening, it wasn't easy to return every ball just by using one's eyes. The higher the level of the match, the more players read their opponent's posture or where they were looking. The ability to do this was predicting where the ball would come from, an exceptional skill. And what Junio had when he was a professional table tennis player was the genius of prediction. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that he had received a hint thanks to that. Right after, he manages to dodge those attacks again, and apparently he succeeds in landing a hit on that girl. However, she was still standing, thinking that the guy definitely had more stats than she did. His group appears, saying that they had already finished over there, so they should put an end to this quickly before the enemies returned. The girl asks if the function of the return crystal is revival, and the protagonist replies that it was, but even now, knowing that wouldn't be useful to her. Thinking that even if she had a hidden ability that allowed her to strike back, she would still be unable to withstand this. He just needed to take a risk on the damage, ensuring that he would finish this now. Right after, the girl asks if he really thought he had already won. Then the system announces that her shot had leveled up. Without wasting time, Lee tries to attack her, but it was already too late because she had already evolved all of her stats. And in a matter of seconds, she was able to easily defeat our hero. Sometime later, the system announces that the 3rd floor mission had ended, and that guy was apparently frustrated. Lee, confused, asks why the guy was making that face. After all, they had already won, and the guy says that he was the one who carried the mission this time, but the gold reward was too small. Meanwhile, Lee thinks that he hadn't expected the consecutive shots in that final battle. Even so, he was able to land a hit on her, and as her last words, she had said that she wanted to remember his name. After that, 3 people occupied the altar, and as a result, they had won. Moreover, that girl gave him chills, so he hoped they wouldn't meet again. Looking to the side, Lee comes across a portal, where it appeared to be the group of people who had fought before. The system announces that the defeated group would face a disaster. At that moment, a creature appears and begins attacking all the players. Meanwhile, they were in despair, begging for help. Approaching the players, the other girl says that they needed to help them, but it was too late, and the only thing our hero's group could do was watch. Meanwhile, a guy inside the portal was pleading for help, and Lee, frustrated, was watching with an expression full of hatred. A voice announces that only one player in Area C, number 1427, had survived, and because of that, the group was reorganized. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that there was only one person he had managed to kill in the enemy group. At that moment, an unknown person appears in that place. Then it is revealed that it was that same girl from before, and the system announces that a new group had been created. Observing that situation, the girl says that it was disgusting. In the midst of that, Lee was frustrated, thinking that it was no surprise that he had been feeling uneasy a moment ago. Sometime later, the scene cuts to the group in another place. A girl asks if the fourth floor was an abandoned city. The system announces that at 6 o'clock, a disaster would descend upon that city, so they had to kill all the monsters appearing in the city while securing the escape portal. The escape portal would appear randomly while they hunted the monsters, and only 20 portals would emerge. Moreover, they couldn't allow another person to use their portal. The group was very excited because finally a monster hunting mission had taken place, and after passing through the second and third floors, they were getting stronger. The other guy, Happy, says that they would kill all the monsters, leveling up like crazy. The other girl says that since they were told they couldn't let others use their portal, it meant there was no limit to the number of monsters that could appear. The other guy says that if a person opened multiple portals, there would be people who wouldn't be able to escape, so it could be a trap set by the tower. Meanwhile, Lee was silently observing the entire conversation. They finally came to a conclusion that the moment they opened a portal, they should stop hunting and escape immediately. In the midst of that situation, Lee seemed pleased, thinking that even after coming this far, it looked like everyone understood what needed to be done in a mission. However, there was still a problem to be solved there. The other girl then appears, asking why she had to do this. She said he shouldn't dare to give orders, and if he did, she would kill him. The group watching that situation was very angry, and the protagonist wonders if they should unite against her. A flashback from 12 hours earlier appears with the guy saying that this wasn't a place to act as if she was important because, without a useful weapon, she was nothing. Hearing this, the girl punches the guy. The group watching everything is surprised by her abilities, and the girl asks if he really thought he had multiple lives. Lee tells her that she was in his territory, so she should stop messing around, thinking that he had gone through all this to kill a potential Star Slayer, but he never expected a real one to appear, wondering if she was truly fighting even with her weapon. Observing Lee, the girl stands in front of him, saying that they had finally met again. Our hero asks if she had something to say to him because he didn't think they were in a situation to exchange polite greetings. At that moment, the boy feels something, wondering what it was. And the system announces that the Star Slayer had designated him as its main target, and as a protective measure, it would provide him with a guide. Seeing what was written, our hero looks surprised. Sometime later, the scene cuts to the present with a voice saying they were sorry for hitting his handsome face. Moreover, he should just stay quiet and become her XP. At the same moment that the guy defeats that monster, a portal is revealed. Right after, the guy looks to the side and suddenly comes across the protagonist. Asking what he was doing there, Lee questions why he looks so shocked and whether he did something wrong. However, the man responds that it wasn't that. He just thought Lee had already opened a portal. Lee, in turn, asks if he had opened one already. The frustrated guy thinks that Lee is way too smart. After that, the protagonist kicks the guy into the portal, telling him to stop messing around. In the midst of that situation, the boy thinks that he already knew the guy was going to try something, and at least now he had solved one problem. Reading the guide, the system announces that if he were killed by the Star Slayer, an assassin would obtain a very good reward. Lee thinks that he didn't know when the Blood Day would happen, but there was a high chance it would be advantageous for the Star Slayer. Looking ahead, the boy comes across a monster. Without wasting time, he defeats it, and the system announces that he received XP. Looking around, Lee says that it didn't open a portal for him. Even if he could kill all the monsters on that floor, there wasn't enough time. Moreover, he needed to be careful with Suyen, who was killing monsters somewhere, wondering how she could be doing that. At that moment, the boy smells something, and looking to the side, he spots a monster. The system announces that while all orcs have a scent, those that leave a portal behind will have a worse odor than the others. Looking to the side, Lee assumes that this monster would release a portal, but when he looks at Lee, he seems like just a normal monster. Even so, Lee charges at it, easily defeating it. As a result, the system announces that a portal has been opened. The scene cuts to another location, where that girl seems very frustrated. Lee, in turn, asks why he was so unlucky. The girl questions if he was really like that, and the protagonist responds that he had already warned her before, because he had never won anything in his life, and that kind of mission with random luck was the worst kind of thing for him, thinking that it was because he was intentionally avoiding the orcs that opened portals. Because Suya needed to kill him on Blood Day, she had no choice but to let him kill the orcs instead. So if Lee died without securing a portal, it would be bad for her as well. However, it was obvious that he had already secured one anyway. At that moment, the system announces that a certain player had opened a portal, and as a result, there were 5 portals left. Lee, acting dramatically, says that there were only 5 portals left, questioning if that was why people played random luck games. However, that girl was already furious, telling him to shut up and just focus on his hunt. Sometime later, the scene cuts to an orc charging at the protagonist. He thinks that the more orcs he cuts down, the more he feels both regretful and pleasantly refreshed. It was like his relationship with Seo and Eon, because thinking about how she worried about him just to kill him felt ironic. Lee says that he was the only one who hadn't found a portal, asking why she was so anxious. Moreover, he asks her to say it already, questioning how many portals she had opened. The girl replies that she had already opened 5 portals, and Lee, surprised, thinks that was quite a lot. Even so, it was still within the margin, and while she had 5, Lee only had 1. Again, time passes, and apparently only 3 portals remained. Maybe the only ones left on the 4th floor were just the 2 of them. At that moment, the system announces that there were only 10 minutes left to find a portal. Without wasting time, the protagonist starts running, saying that he would find one on his own so she could go ahead. At that moment, the girl asks him to wait. In the midst of that situation, Lee wonders if she had realized what he was trying to do, questioning if she had any other business with him and if she knew that there were only 10 minutes left. Meanwhile, the girl remains silent. The protagonist realizes that something was wrong and that he needed to get out of there quickly. At that moment, the girl leaps forward, and without wasting time, Lee grabs his weapon. However, surprisingly, a girl grabs him, saying that she had forgotten the locations of the portals she had opened. Our hero, hearing this, is shocked, wondering if she had no sense of direction at all. Sometime later, the scene cuts to another location, and the group was happy because the protagonist had finally arrived. Quickly, the other guy was about to hug our hero, saying that he knew he would return. But as he approaches, he ends up getting punched by Lee. Lee says that it scared him a lot and that he thought his mission wasn't completed yet. Observing the guy, the girl comments that now that she thinks about it, he looked like an orc. The protagonist says there was no need to say that out loud. After that, the whole group starts approaching Lee because he had finally arrived safely. Right after, the other boy says that even though she was their enemy in the past, she was now their companion, so he was looking forward to working with her from now on. Hearing this, the girl remains silent and then moves away from him, saying that he was too noisy. The other guy, frustrated, says that she should have been stuck on the 4th floor until she died. Hearing this, the girl tells him to shut up, making the guy even more frustrated. Watching all of this, Lee thinks that it didn't make sense for the Star Slayer, blessed by the system, to die just because she got lost. So he should just see this as a chance to put her in debt to him. Even so, he needed to stay alert regardless. At that moment, a voice says that they should all be used to this kind of thing by now. Then that rabbit from before appears, but at that moment, it ends up getting shot down. The other girl, frustrated, asks why it was there again. Lee, watching that, is very surprised because she had just shot the rabbit, which immediately regenerates completely. Right after, it charges at the girl, who seemingly gets hit by its attack. Lee, observing the situation, is surprised because the rabbit had thrown the girl into the air with ease. However, considering the stats that creature could have, maybe it had gone easy on her. The rabbit, calming down, asked them to wait a bit because it was still too early to stop working. They all should already be heading to the next mission. But before that, they had to do something before proceeding to the next floor. Go to the bottom of the hall. At that moment, they are teleported. The protagonist starts looking around, assuming that it was probably a library. The rabbit announces that from this point, everyone must choose a book, which could either help them survive or be completely useless, leading to their deaths. The other guy says that it's not like he would let a mere book decide his fate. The boy asks if he could become stronger if he found a sword technique manual. However, the rabbit says that they cannot reveal the book's contents to anyone else. Moreover, all the books there would disappear as soon as the 5th floor mission began. They hoped that everyone would choose a book they wouldn't regret. At that moment, the creature disappears and everyone is left confused about what was happening. Even so, they start choosing books based on their individual traits. Lee thinks that this was expected to happen, as it would be a waste of time to look for anything else in that situation. Right after, the system prompts him to choose the book called The Returning Connections Monopoly of Rank SS from the novel selection. After that, Lee selects the book, and the system announces that he cannot change it or reveal its content to anyone. Observing the book, the protagonist feels disappointed, thinking that the title itself already seemed useless. Either way, he was sure that it was recommended for a reason, so he should read it first. However, as he begins reading some parts, he realizes that it's one of those cheap, mass-produced fantasy stories. Looking around, the boy notices that everyone else was enjoying their books and learning from them, assuming that he should have picked his sword technique instead. Glancing to the side, he sees one of his companions building a tent, wondering what kind of book they had read. Moreover, he wanted to know why he kept hearing those hammering sounds. Meanwhile, that girl seemed very frustrated, saying that one day she would kill that rabbit. Without wasting time, Lee starts walking away, thinking that he should avoid her. At that moment, the system announces that the allotted time has ended, and so they would be teleported to the 5th floor. Then it is revealed that they were in a classroom. Even so, they didn't know who those people were, and it seemed like time had stopped there. The other girl says that it feels like they had gotten younger, and the other guy responds that she was right. Observing the situation, Lee thinks that they might have returned to their student days to fit the mission's context. Looking to the side, Lee is surprised because that was how Siyang looked in his teenage years. Right after, a voice says that Lee doesn't look any different from before. Looking to the side, he realizes that it was the girl who healed others, and besides that, she was very beautiful even when she was younger. Even so, there was still one thing he couldn't believe, asking if the one beside him was really that assassin. The irritated girl questions what he's looking at, and Lee thinks that Siyang truly hadn't changed at all. Right after, a voice begins asking if they were appreciating the youth they had returned to because it was a beautiful thing. And the fifth floor mission was role-playing. In this place, it was another dimension where humans and monsters existed. From now on, they would be cadets at an academy that trains monster hunters, and over the next 4 days, missions would appear from time to time. If they failed a mission, they would be on the path of the death mission, so they had to make sure to do their best. Lee thinks that, although in missions he had already survived death, it would be difficult for a normal player to endure that. Even so, he knew that he should have chosen a sword technique manual instead of a useless novel. Without wasting time, the rabbit says that it was time to give them the necessary memories for the roleplay. At that moment, a sort of spirit strikes all the players on the forehead. Lee, in turn, was no different from the others. The system announces that the given memories were now in place. Lee thinks that it's fascinating because it feels like two different sets of memories exist in his mind, which was probably due to the content of the book he had read earlier. The rabbit says that once class ends, the mission will begin, so they should enjoy the present moment as much as they can. Sometime later, a teacher appears to be explaining a lesson in that classroom. Meanwhile, Lee thinks that if they were really inside a novel, he and the others were just side characters. And the man in front of him was exactly the protagonist of the novel, whose name was Yunma. Thanks to the information he had, he was able to monopolize various connections with people and places and became the strongest of them all. Showing a question, the teacher asks if anyone wants to try answering it, and if they answer correctly, they would earn shot points. The protagonist thinks that this was a level of question that normal students would never be able to answer, and originally only the protagonist of the novel should be able to answer it. When the guy was about to raise his hand, our hero raises his first, answering that it was a material known as action. Currently, Professor Brown's team from the Columbia community was researching it. Hearing the response, the professor is surprised because it seemed like a genius was in the class. As a reward, our hero earns shot points, and he finally understands why the system had rewarded him with that novel. Because a sword technique or martial arts manual wasn't necessary, he would obtain all the connections he was looking for before anyone else. The scene cuts to outside the academy, where a guy asks how he knew that answer. The protagonist responds that it was in the memories he was given. Irritated, the guy says that maybe he had good character, and the protagonist says that if he had a problem, he should take it up with the tower. Then the other girl asks when he thought the mission would begin. In the midst of that situation, our hero thinks that based on the novel he had read, it should start immediately. Surprisingly, the system appears, announcing that the mission objective was to clear the dungeon that appeared beside Building B with a time limit of 60 minutes. Lee thinks that the item that drops from the monster is extremely important and will play a major role in the future. Originally, the novel's protagonist was supposed to obtain it, but Lee wasn't going to just stand by and let that happen. Sometime later, the group had already entered the dungeon. The other guy, surprised, asks how the group had found that place. At that moment, the protagonist moves behind him, eliminating an orc, asking if he thought he was the only one capable of finding this place. And the protagonist of the novel, seeing this, is very surprised. After all, he had no idea how they had managed to find that place, wondering if the cadets in his class were really that strong, especially that woman with the gun alongside Lee who wielded that sword. Because there was no way to forget people as strong as that, and if they continued at this pace, they might steal what was his right from under his nose. Without wasting time, the guy grabs his spear, and after that, he throws it, piercing through all the orcs at once. Surprisingly, the spear changes direction and then returns to the man's hand. The group, seeing that, realizes that the man was truly powerful. And Lee, observing the protagonist of the novel, thinks that seeing him in real life made him seem very powerful, which meant that he would not simply hand over the dungeon reward, so he must see who would win. With momentum, they would be able to complete the mission without any problem. If they wanted to claim the dungeon reward, they would need to kill as many orcs as possible to earn the right to challenge the boss monster. The current protagonist of that novel is stronger than Lee. However, Lee is a specialist when it comes to finding monsters. In the midst of that situation, that girl was frustrated, thinking she had lost to his petty tricks. The scene is cut again to Lee advancing toward all those orcs, managing to defeat most of them easily. However, there was still one left, and without wasting time, it tries to attack the protagonist, but right after, that girl appears and manages to defeat one of them. Then, another orc appears from above her, and she barely manages to dodge it. Meanwhile, the protagonist of the novel was defeating even more monsters, and from afar, the whole group was watching all three of them because they were incredible. Watching from a distance, another girl asks if they weren't feeling that Lee was a bit more desperate than usual. The other boy says that he is showing them his noble heart, which does not want to see them sent on a death mission. With tears on his face, the man says he supports Lee. After that, he raises his sword, affirming that he would work even harder. Hearing all that shouting, the protagonist is confused, but even so, he returns to the battle. The system notifies that the boss room has appeared and all the orcs have been eliminated, and the person who had the right to challenge the dungeon was not Lee, but the protagonist of the novel. Our hero is frustrated, thinking that he had done his best, but it still wasn't enough. As the protagonist of the novel was entering the door, Lee wonders what he should do and whether he should give up. With the man about to open the door, our hero calls him, asking to also be given the right to challenge the monster, and the man, confused, questions what he was talking about. Lee asks if he didn't want to know the way they had to perform regressions, and with a smile on his face, our hero thinks that he wasn't one to give up so easily. After that, someone opens the boss door, and apparently, it was Lee who had done it. Apparently, the scene is cut to a flashback with that man asking who the hell Lee was. The protagonist asks him to put away his sword first, but the man incessantly demands an answer, questioning how Lee knew that he was a regressor. Our hero asks if that was really important, answering that a winter happened when he was 32 years old. After that, a flashback appears with a man saying that the starting point of the regression was during November when he was 17 years old. The other man states that he was actually right. The man says that his life was suddenly lived during the golden period of life, from 17 to 32 years old, and because of that, he held a lot of envy for it, and that he hadn't told him this before because he wanted to see the winter that happened when he was 32 years old. Besides that, he was very tired of that damn regression. The scene is cut again to the present with Lee saying that if he let him challenge the boss room, he would tell him how he could break the chains of regression. Lee thinks that that man's dream was to escape from that damned infinite regression, and because of that, he would have no other choice but to accept his request. The man, frustrated, says that if he was joking, then things would really get very bad for him. Even so, he ends up granting him the right to challenge the boss as well. Sometime later, the scene cuts to Lee, who somehow finally managed to enter the boss room, and before him, a gigantic creature was watching. Lee thinks that the boss monsters seem to be very complicated, but even so, he must remain calm because he is in a novel and had no information about its level or guide. Either way, he knows a way to defeat it, and his first strategy would be that one. Then the orc inhales through its mouth and lets out a roar. In the midst of that situation, our protagonist thinks that most challengers would lose the will to fight due to the roar. However, his impeccable senses not only amplify his perception, but are also capable of completely blocking them. Even a mental attack that used sound. At that very moment, our hero leaps, and advancing toward the orc, says that it would not work against him. The second strategy was to observe that its torso was as hard as steel, but its lower body was completely weak in comparison to its torso. After that, Lee manages to dodge one of the attacks and without wasting time, strikes towards the monster's leg. After hitting it multiple times, the monster falls to its knees. However, Lee was not done yet because he immediately charges forward again, saying that the reward would definitely be his. At that moment, the system notifies that the orc warrior has dropped an item. Time passes and Lee is apparently engaged in a game of rock, paper, scissors. The frustrated man says he lost again, and Lee thinks that this was his 11th consecutive victory. The man asks if he wasn't cheating, and the protagonist questions how he could cheat in rock, paper, scissors, so he should just hand over his gold already. There were only 2 mythical items that appeared in that novel, and one was Jungner, the protagonist's weapon. A super powerful item that would always hit the target it was aiming at. The other one was also Nick's rank, which he specifically managed to obtain by defeating the orc. Even though it was a simple option, this item was incredibly good compared to the one the protagonist of the novel had. This would become a very reliable insurance for the many turning points that were to come. As a consequence, the protagonist of the novel would have to progress without that ring, but as compensation, he would provide him with the information he needed. After all, there was only one thing he truly desired in that novel. At that moment, someone sits next to Lee. It is revealed that it was Sueon, asking to play against him next. Thinking that rock, paper, scissors is not just a game of pure luck, but also a conflict of agility. Lee asks how much she wants to bet, and the girl responds that it would be 33,000 euros. Hearing this, Lee is surprised, but he still accepts, although he wants to raise the bet to 5,000. The scene then cuts to the next day. Several people were gathered in the academy courtyard, and Lee thinks that the cliché scene that appears in every kind of novel was about to happen, which was the strength assessment by punching a machine. Soon after, the professor begins to explain, asking them to use their weapons to attack the crystal, and their magical power would be displayed in values. The brown-haired one says this is great because he was curious about how strong the cadets there were. After that, the other people start measuring their powers. The other guy's attack resulted in a strength level of 43, leaving everyone very surprised because his first attempt was already quite solid. The brown-haired one says that from what he could judge, the numbers seem to be considered high, and Lee responds that from the implanted memories, he remembers him as someone strong. The professor asks the next cadet to come forward, and the brown-haired one says it was already his turn, and after hitting the crystal, his strength is measured at 69. The students were very surprised, asking if that was really that strong. Soon after, the red-haired one also steps up to hit the crystal, saying that when it came to punch machines, he was the best. After striking the crystal, it is revealed that his strength is 75. All the students are shocked because he achieved that amount of strength without using any weapon. At that moment, a shot is fired beside that guy, revealing that it was Suyeon who had fired it, and her strength measured at 98. The people were surprised, and besides that, they didn't know it was possible to infuse mana into a weapon. Observing all that, Lee feels pleased, thinking that it seemed like his companions were much stronger than the Academy cadets. After that, the protagonist of the novel takes his test, which then results in a power level of 115, and Lee thinks that this was everything, excluding that guy. But from what he remembered, something was about to happen to him soon. The scene cuts to the other guy, who asks why he didn't achieve better results, and the protagonist questions what was the point if they weren't even giving out rewards yet. Besides, he couldn't have a high score and couldn't be getting scores that would make him the leader of the group. At that moment, the system informs that the mission was about to begin, where they had to rescue the protagonist of the novel, and the time limit would be 1 hour. The yellow-haired one asks if it was that strong cadet they saw in the dungeon, and the other guy replies that yes, wondering if they had perhaps fallen into some kind of trap. Meanwhile, our hero was watching all of this in silence, wondering if this was really how things were going to happen. Because after the guy regressed, he taught a lesson to some vagabonds inside the academy. But one of those people is the only son of Park, the leader of the Red Moon Guild and one of the 10 best guilds. That guy had told his high-ranking hunters to have his direct subordinates beat the protagonist of the novel until he was half dead. However, in the novel, he was lucky because he was rescued by someone. However, this was only possible because he had the ring that the protagonist was currently holding. The yellow-haired girl says that if his performance is bad enough for the protagonist of the novel to be in danger, then it was probably very dangerous. Lee then responds that yes, and that's why they should be prepared because their opponents are difficult to defeat using normal methods. No matter how strong the protagonist of the novel was now, he was still just a cadet at the academy. So they needed to rescue him at any cost. Sometime later, the brown-haired one seemed to be exhausted. The other guy asks if he was daring to annoy his young master because that was certainly fearless. At that moment, the guy realizes something, but before he can react, he gets shot. Then after that, the protagonist appears along with his group. Lee asks what she was doing all of a sudden, and the girl responds that she just didn't like that person. Without wasting time, the red-haired one charges toward that group. Having no other choice, our hero also grabs his sword, charging at all those guys, who then start reacting by drawing all their weapons. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that although it seemed like she had fired impulsively, her timing had been impeccable. They got 3 enemies, but the difference in their skills was huge, and the only way to create a serious opening with a single attack was exactly what she had done. At that moment, the protagonist of the novel seems to be thinking of doing something. Shortly after, he draws his spear, attacking the guy next to him. However, another group notices this and without wasting time charges at the boy. However, Lee's group was already well positioned to protect the boy, and Yuma says that he doesn't know how they kept appearing, but this was not the time to argue. Lee, in turn, says that they should save their thanks for later and instead focus on resolving that situation. Meanwhile, the red-haired one was charging at that guy and then lands a punch. A barrier protects the young man, who in the meantime seems very frustrated with the situation. After that, the red-haired one falls to the ground. The guy in the back then starts laughing, saying that since he had only been exposed to the world inside the academy, it was natural that he didn't know about that. Charging at the students, the man says that the world can be quite terrifying. Soon after, a battle begins between the students and those men. Lee starts talking to the assassin, saying that while they buy time on the front lines, he wanted her to protect them as much as possible. The girl, in turn, asks who he thought he was to be giving orders. Starting to organize the group, Lee says that those who are injured should move to the back. After that, they should return to the front lines once they are healed. Observing the situation, Yuma is very surprised, wondering if there was someone in their academy capable of such healing abilities. While fighting, Lee says that although their enemies are incredibly strong, there was no way they would be given a mission that couldn't be completed. Giving a signal, the boy says that it was already time. It was the moment to use the abilities he had obtained from books. After that, the brown-haired one attacks that guy. Without wasting time, the red-haired one also strikes, landing a blow on the other man. And Lee is very surprised because the other guy, instead of helping, was simply setting up a tent. Hearing all that conversation, the other man asks if they really thought they had time to discuss this. Charging again, he says that they should be looking up. At that moment, the 3 men attack all at once. After that, a gigantic explosion occurs. However, Lee's group was still standing. Our boy thinks that those people were truly powerful. After overcoming the previous missions, he thought they had become a united team that wouldn't be easily defeated. But the experience of those people who had worked together for so long was on a completely different level from theirs. Even though the three fought in a well-coordinated formation, if they could somehow take down one of them, then everything would collapse quickly. But there was no opportunity to achieve that because it was as if they were looking at an iron door with no openings. At that moment, the other girl who was healing asked them to hold on, because she will support them at all times. The black-haired guy says they are quite resilient for kids, and that's why hunters in their country have a bright future ahead. The white-haired one says that this is not the time to be so relaxed because if they let this continue any further, things will only become more dangerous. Meanwhile, the other guy was on the verge of madness. Without wasting time, he charges at the players once again. Charging toward the healer, he says that he will start with her. Lee, in turn, tries to react, but at that moment, the protagonist of the novel draws his spear. After that, he strikes that guy, who seemed very surprised, thinking that he was sure he had dodged that. After that, he ends up falling to the ground due to his injuries. The group going to help their superior says that they had told him not to rush things. Observing the situation, our hero thinks that their formation has been broken, and that the once indomitable iron wall now has an opening. Meanwhile, the blue-haired one was completely surrounded, saying that now that things had come to this, he would defeat them all. Observing the situation, Lee thinks that they were growing impatient because they were being delayed more than they had expected. Besides that, he already knew the reason why they were losing their patience. Soon after, those three guys charge at the group once again. Then the protagonist of the novel asks if they will be okay, because the president must be very angry right now. Hearing this, the three suddenly stop and the other guy asks what he was talking about. Listening to that conversation, Lee intervenes, asking if the president of the Red Moon, named Park, was really that impatient. The group is then very surprised, asking how Lee knew about that. The protagonist questions how many people had been killed just because that unfortunate man had been irritated by them. Thus, an opening suddenly appears in all three of them. The group, realizing this, wastes no time and begins attacking them. After that, their leader is defeated. Seeing this, his subordinates were very surprised as they were apparently already cornered. Then the other guy starts laughing, saying that they should stop that fight right there. Approaching his master, he says that the president would probably still punish them when they returned in that state. Now that they had seen the hunters who represent the future of Korea, they had no regrets. The white-haired one says that he was doing whatever he wanted as always and using a teleportation skill. He wishes that the academy students stay safe. At that moment, the system appears, alerting that they had completed the mission, making the entire group very happy. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that it was close because the remaining time was only 2 minutes. Then Yuma asks if the boy knew about this, about what was going to happen that day. Lee says that they had saved him, asking if he shouldn't be thanking them first. Reluctantly, the protagonist of the novel starts to thank them, but Lee says that he couldn't hear him properly, thinking that for him, this must be the regression in which he experienced many changes, which is why he never went through anything similar in his previous regressions. Starting to leave, Lee asks him to continue being careful in the future, because this regression will be more difficult than any other he had faced before. Then the protagonist of the novel says that he has one more question, asking if our hero was also a regressor. With a smile on his face, Lee replies that no, because he was something much greater than that. Hearing this, the protagonist of the novel is surprised, and shortly after, he grabs the protagonist's shoulder, asking where he was going, because he had forgotten to say the way to escape that damn regression. Sometime later, the scene cuts to the academy with the professor saying that he would be announcing the groups for the next day's dungeon practice. Meanwhile, our hero seemed to be analyzing something, thinking that the protagonist of the novel really knew how to do things the right way, and that he thought being the protagonist made him accept realities that were harder to accept. Shortly after, the professor begins announcing Youngma's group, which would be divided into 3 people. Additionally, Lee would also be in the group, thinking that it happened exactly as he had planned. To obtain the best reward, he had managed to enter his group somehow, but it was not the time to celebrate. Thus, time passes, and a protagonist of the novel asks if he also knew about this because the dungeon they were going to next time would be much worse. Hearing everything, Lee remains silent and nods his head. Youngma responds that a wild phenomenon in the dungeon occasionally happens, but it didn't make sense for it to happen simultaneously. He had fought in every regression, and he was never able to find the cause of it, so he hoped that Lee would share any information he had. Because his existence is something greater than a regressor, he probably knew something. In the midst of that situation, Lee thinks that based on the development of the novel, 3 groups, including Group 4, would experience the Berserk Dungeon. In that incident, the only group that avoided being annihilated was Group 4, which was precisely where the protagonist of the novel was. However, the details of the Berserk Dungeon or the cause of it had not been mentioned in the novel. And returning to the present, our hero responds that he really had no idea about that. Shortly after, Youngma grabs the protagonist by the collar of his shirt, saying that what has to happen will happen and questioning whether he shouldn't at least try to do something. However, Lee responds that he doesn't know what is going to happen, thinking that the author gave no clues throughout the novel until the end and concluded that part of the novel in a vague manner. Meanwhile, the assassin girl was listening to the whole discussion. Approaching the noise, she asks what they were doing and then comes across a rather peculiar scene. Trying to play it off, the girl says that she got lost again, but the protagonist asks her to wait because it wasn't what it looked like. Again, time passes and the group is finally on the verge of entering that dungeon. After entering the place, the system appears, welcoming them and then stating the objective, which was to clear the designated dungeon. Meanwhile, our hero thinks that he needed to resolve an incident with that girl because that strange situation was too incomprehensible. Starting to organize the group, Yangma says that they will split up and scout the dungeon first, and if anything happens, they should just contact each other via radio. Meanwhile, the orange-haired ones seem to be observing our hero, who then starts walking through the dungeon, thinking that the groups involved in the Berserk dungeon were Group 4, along with Groups 9 and 12. Group 4 was them, and Group 9 had Soyeon along with the healer. Besides that, they couldn't forget Group 12, which included the red-haired guy. Group 9 would probably be fine because it had the healer girl along with the assassin star who had the blessing of the tower and would never die so easily on the 5th floor. Now Group 12 is in a completely different situation. At that moment, a monster seems to approach the protagonist, who then notices it, and shortly after, those wolves appear. Lee, gripping his sword, thinks that it seemed like he needed to focus on the situation first. However, there was still something he had to resolve because there was a boy who simply had no courage to fight. Observing that situation, Lee is confused, wondering why the guy was crying. Sometime later, Lee had already defeated all the monsters, asking the boy if he still hadn't gotten over what happened back then. The orange-haired one says that he didn't have the courage to talk to the protagonist and should have spoken to him before because he truly regretted what he had done. Hearing this, Lee remains silent, thinking that that guy was really sensitive. Shortly after, he places a hand on the boy's shoulder, affirming that there was no need to apologize and that if it happened again, he should make the same decision he had made before. The situations they were facing were as real as they seemed, and in the Tower of the End, where they could die at any moment. And learning to think about oneself first was how one survived in that place, and for that reason, he shouldn't feel guilty. Hearing this, the boy smiles, saying that he thought Lee was truly incredible. Changing the subject, Lee says that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Then the orange-haired one says that he must have been someone incredible before the end happened. However, upon hearing this, our hero remains silent, thinking that just because he had lived in an orphanage when he was young, he had to fight against discrimination. Before he realized it, he was already in his 20s and was just an ordinary worker with a salary that barely allowed him to eat. That's why the only reason he became somewhat special in the tower was due to mere coincidence. Because of that, if it weren't for what happened back then, he might not have survived until this moment, and he was no one to teach others about anything. Approaching the protagonist, the orange-haired one asks what he was thinking, but the boy responds that it's nothing. Then the orange-haired one thanks him, saying that even though he told him to think about his own survival first, he always put himself in danger to save others. So he wants to become someone like him who can truly help others. Hearing this, our hero smiles, thinking that what was important would happen from now on because the path they would walk was ahead. Sometime later, the orange-haired one seems to be holding onto some kind of wall. Lee asks if that was the place where he felt a strange energy, and the boy responds that yes, because he thought something was leaking from there. Observing the situation, our hero thinks that he cannot detect anything with his impeccable senses, and shortly after, he asks the boy to step aside, and at that moment, Lee draws his sword. Striking down on that wall, a red aura seemingly appears. After that, an explosion occurs, and the system notifies them that they have entered the labyrinth. Lee thinks that the labyrinth had never appeared in the novel before, and even in the protagonist's regressions, there had never been a single mention of a labyrinth. For that reason, there is only one conclusion. This place was not created by the author and could contain clues about the cause of the dungeon going berserk. At that moment, a monster appears and asks why humans are in that place. Lee, seeing the creature's stats, is surprised because it was truly very powerful. Moreover, there were several of the same monster. Shortly after, the other guy asked them to wait because those people were not just characters. Especially the other, larger guy, because he had changed the story in a significant way and tells the protagonist of the novel a conclusive spoiler. Hearing this, our hero seems to be nervous and the other creature says that they should talk. Everyone then faces the protagonist, but they were very small in comparison. Analyzing Lee, the other goblin asks who he was, to which he responds that he was just a reader who had read his way into this world. Sometime later, Lee had already told the entire story, and the other monster asks if, when he opened his eyes, he was inside the novel. The boy responds that that's exactly what happened, but they didn't seem to believe him. Lee asks who those creatures were, and they respond that they are the fairy repairers, who fix holes in bad novels like the one they were in now. Lee thinks that those were indeed their characteristics, and meanwhile, the other monster was wondering where he had left his hammer. Our hero responds that he must be having a hard time, so there must be a lot of holes to fix in that novel. After that, the monsters are moved because their work was being appreciated. Before, they were considering burying him underground, but instead they would just erase his memories and let the boy go in peace. Hearing this, our hero is terrified, thinking that they shouldn't say such horrifying things with such a straight face. Besides that, you couldn't let them do that, because if he lost his memories, finding that labyrinth after all this effort would be meaningless. Our hero then starts talking about the berserker of the third floor, saying that it was the hole that would happen this time and asking if they hadn't found a way to fix it. The workers are then surprised, asking how the boy knew about that, thinking that even if the novel was bad, there were still things he had learned from it. For that reason, he might be able to provide a solution to fix all of this. Sometime later, the scene cuts. The boy, happy, says that he was finally out. Looking to the side, he notices the protagonist looking visibly shaken, asking if something had happened to him. After that, a flashback appears with our hero saying that he thought he could provide a solution to correct the plot hole. The other guy thinks that if they left it as it would become the biggest plot hole so far, and his reputation as a mechanic would be ruined. Thus, he ends up deciding to listen to the boy, who says that they should combine the 3 dungeons that were about to go berserk into a single portal. The other monster says that if they combine 3 dungeons into one compared to 3 dungeons randomly going berserk at the same time, it would seem much more natural. Because of that, it sounded far more convincing. If the size of the dungeon increased, then the reward for clearing it should also be greater. Even so, the boy was right, because that was a consequence that even they couldn't play around with. Lee thinks that they were worried that this would ruin the protagonist's story by giving him a greater reward. Besides, that was already expected, so he asks if it wouldn't work if he, instead of the protagonist, were the one to receive the reward. Hearing this, the other man is surprised. Lee thinks that the dice had already been cast, so now he could only leave the rest to the ring. Thus, the monster says that it would be best to erase the boy's memory, because if a stranger could accomplish so much, it would put them in a very difficult situation. After that, Lee ends up losing his memory, and the scene returns to the present of the boy getting slapped. Frustrated, the red-haired one wonders what those dwarves had done. However, the protagonist responds that he was already fine. The boy is then happy because Lee already regained consciousness. The scene is cut again with the 2 walking, and the orange-haired one apologizes because he thought Lee had lost his memories. Our hero thinks that they were lucky that there was a time limit on the mission of the 5th floor, since there was no need to erase the memories of someone who was going to leave. Looking to the side, our hero comes across the dwarf's hammer. Then the orange-haired one picks up the hammer, saying that all the dwarves had taken it and then disappeared, so he took the hammer as a consequence. Observing the stats, Lee realizes that it is a unique item and was incredibly powerful. Moreover, the boy was not just weak and fragile to have managed to take the hammer. Additionally, since he had made a secret contract with the fairies, an exclusive mission had been created for him. To prevent him from becoming an error in the story, there was a condition to achieve the results. At that moment, the ground begins to shake. The system alerts that due to an unknown energy, the dungeon has gone berserk and stronger monsters will begin to appear. The orange-haired one is surprised because 3 dungeons had been combined into one. In the midst of that situation, our hero tells the boy to stay focused and go meet Yuma, thinking that this boy was more important than he seemed, because if he was with the protagonist of the novel, he wouldn't need to worry about him. Then the orange-haired one asks what the protagonist was going to do. With a smile on his face, he remains silent. The scene then cuts to a giant scorpion. The other guy asks why the monster was spitting venom, and the other boy responds that he thought the berserk dungeon had awakened the monsters. Besides that, they had to thank the other girl, because if it weren't for her, they would already be dead. At that moment, the scorpion was about to attack the boy, but right after, it suddenly stops, because apparently it had already been defeated. A voice asks if they were there for a picnic, because they needed to wake up quickly. It is revealed to be Soyeon, saying that unless they wanted to turn into skeletons, they should start moving. The scene is cut again to our hero defeating all the monsters, and hearing the sounds of gunfire, he assumes that was where COE1's group was. She had an advantage against venomous monsters since she had a weapon, but it was still dangerous for the other cadets. Since he had to act discreetly, there was no way to help them openly. For that reason, his only choice was to clear the dungeon as quickly as possible. Shortly after, another giant scorpion appears and then lets out a roar. Lee says that this was the place where the most toxic smell was coming from. Looking ahead, he comes across the Scorpion King. The monster tries to attack the protagonist, but the boy dodges with a jump, wondering how much venom that creature had because he couldn't get close to it. The protagonist of the novel would handle things with brute force somehow, but the other 2 dungeons needed his help. So while he might be doing this just to obtain first place, he couldn't let such a tragedy happen nearby. Shortly after, he begins charging toward the scorpion, dodging all the venom attacks. Once again, the monster attacks, but the protagonist evades with a leap. However, he ends up getting hit by the scorpion's tail and is then thrown against the wall. Observing the situation, Lee thinks that he needed to get into the place somehow. Having no other choice, he wonders if there was really no way to avoid using that. Jumping, he states that he didn't want to use this so soon, but now is not the time to hold back his trump cards, because he had a one-time use item that he received for completing the side mission. Then the scorpion tries to spit venom at the protagonist, who uses his perfect shield ability, thinking that it was a cheat item that allowed him to perfectly block any attack once. With that, the boy draws his sword, finally managing to land a strike on the scorpion. The system notifies that the boy has defeated the scorpion, and after that, he had already entered the portal, thinking that the only dungeon left was where the red-haired one was. And when he wonders if he was okay, the boy realizes something, questioning himself. Was he actually worried about that person? Because before, he had the worst first impression of him. Now it was probably starting to touch his heart. However, the boy states that there was no way that was possible, because what he just felt was simply the concern one might have for an enemy. Even so, he wanted to know why there was nothing in that place. At that moment, the boy is attacked from below the ground, barely managing to defend himself. An unknown creature appears. Lee, without wasting time, attacks it, thinking that it looked extremely disgusting. But it was still not enough, as several of those creatures appeared again. The protagonist thinks that although they were small in size, they were too fast. So if he didn't stay focused, it could become dangerous even for him. Shortly after, the scene cuts to the red-haired guy, who looked extremely exhausted. Additionally, the other members of his group were on the ground crying. The red-haired one, meanwhile, was deeply frustrated. Without wasting time, he starts charging at those other monsters, saying that his name was Seong, also known as the Mole Slayer, destroying every one of them that appeared in front of him. Sometime later, the red-haired one was completely drained, saying that he had no more strength left. At that moment, another mole appears. When it was about to attack Seong, our hero appears to save him, saying that he could see he had managed to survive. Taeyong, realizing that it was the protagonist, is overjoyed. Shortly after, he moves to hug him. In the midst of that situation, our hero thinks that for now, he was happy that Taeyong was alive. However, with the others, that was not the case. The red-haired one apologizes, saying that those damn moles attacked suddenly. Lee thinks that it seemed like he had failed to protect everyone. Even if they were just side characters in the novel, all humans alive and breathing were like his companions. In the midst of that situation, Seong asks what they should do now and if they would be able to get out of that place. At that moment, the ground begins to shake and a crack appears in it. Observing the situation, our hero says that there was only one thing to do. Shortly after, a giant mole emerges from the ground. Lee, drawing his sword, says that they needed to kill the boss monster. The scene cuts to another location, with the Academy director expressing deep regret for the incident that occurred and offering the maximum compensation possible to those in mourning. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Yumo were walking together. Lee, in turn, apologizes for not being able to save everyone. However, the boy responds that it wasn't necessary because he had regressed countless times and had never been able to prevent the dungeon berserker even once. Even so, he had managed to save some of the cadets when, in truth, all of them should have died. Besides that, he had to admit something, because Lee's existence was greater than that of a regressor. Hearing this, the protagonist is surprised, and then the two stare at each other. Yuma, handing him a handkerchief, says that from that day on, he would occasionally seek Lee's advice. After that, the boy begins to walk away. Shortly after, Lee apologizes because the person Yuma would meet from the next day on would not be him, since they would be returning to the tower soon. Just as one looks for the arrival of winter at the age of 32 and heads toward the end of that novel, he needed to return to the tower. And while the ending of the novel was being decided, it would be the protagonist who determined the fate of the tower. A voice calls for the protagonist to wait, and the boy says that, in truth, they were the ones who would decide the ending of the tower. After that, the system notifies that they had completed the 5th floor mission and would be returning to the lobby. The scene then cuts to another location with the players happy for having completed another tower mission. Meanwhile, Lee seemed extremely pleased. Thinking that he hadn't been able to buy this before, and was surprised to receive it as a reward for completing the 5th floor mission. Because gaining a single level in basic swordsmanship had already made a huge difference, he wondered how much stronger an intermediate swordsman would be. But that wasn't all. He had received items after reaching rank 1 in contribution points along with the secret reward, which was an item capable of granting him a new class. Besides that, he didn't expect to have to take on 2 jobs inside that tower as well. But compared to all the other times he spent looking for jobs, he had never been as excited as he was now. At that moment, our hero crushes the sphere and the system notifies that he had received a new class. Lee, meanwhile, was extremely eager to see what its class would be. His expectations are completely shattered when he finds out that his current class would be Tamer. Frustrated, our hero asks the system where his incredible class was. At that moment, the protagonist begins to think more about that class. A flashback appears in his mind showing a boy walking. Looking back, he asks someone not to follow him because he wouldn't be able to take care of him. Meanwhile, a small kitten was watching the boy, who then says that he couldn't take care of him even if he looked at him with those eyes. However, the kitten continues to stare at our hero even more, and after that, he starts running away, apologizing. The scene is cut back to the present with Lee thinking that back then, he had no money and had no choice but to abandon the cat. Now, becoming a tamer could actually be interesting. For that reason, the tamer class couldn't be that bad. Once again, the system appears, stating that a guide has been provided, informing that there is a monster on the 7th floor suitable to be a pet, and besides having exceptional combat abilities, it could also be used as transportation. Observing the details the system provided, Lee assumes that it could be a wolf. Moreover, he only needed to reach the 7th floor to obtain that pet, and this was the first time he was actually eager to reach the next floor. However, thinking they could reach the 7th floor quickly was a total miscalculation. because the mission on the 6th floor was apparently an endless battle. In that dungeon, none of the players stopped killing those monsters. Lee, meanwhile, was also in the midst of that situation, defeating every creature that appeared before him. Sometime later, our hero was extremely exhausted, saying that this was truly endless. However, Se-young was still defeating several monsters. Lee asks if the boy wasn't tired of all that, and the red-haired one responds that no, because it was rare to obtain so much experience. Lee thinks that he was right because the 5th floor had a world-building system with no leveling concept, so they had gained nothing, no matter how many monsters they defeated. Se-young realizes that the protagonist was already at level 5, looking very surprised. Lee thinks that he was already at level 5, but leveling up didn't make sense anymore since he had reached the limit of all his stats. Shortly after, the system notifies that his experience had reached the singularity point, and until he surpasses his limits through training, he will not be able to increase his attributes through leveling or even gold. Lee, thinking about training, says that it was very interesting how he managed to monopolize all those incredible items. At that moment, a boy hears a noise, and when he looks to the side, he realizes that it is Se-young. Observing her stats, he wonders if there was really no limit to them. Annoyed, the girl asks what he was looking at and if he wanted to be killed. As he starts walking away, the boy thinks that she was very unpleasant. Thanks to her, his situation there was almost resolved, and the time had finally come. Because once he reached the 7th floor, he would finally get his pet. Thus, time passes, and a voice announces that the mission for the 7th floor would begin soon, and that place was the enhancement area. Because when hunting a monster on the 7th floor, there was a chance of obtaining an enhancement crystal. Players could use gold and enhancement crystals to upgrade their items. However, they could not enhance items that were not weapons or armor. Seeing the mission, the brown-haired one says that since there was no completion condition, it meant they would automatically clear the floor after 72 hours. For that reason, the group was very happy because they could finally have some peace inside the tower. One of the members, meanwhile, was observing the shop, noticing that in the display there was an item known as the Increased Enhancement Chance Crystal. And the other guy says that they should buy as much equipment as possible to prepare for the next floor. Hearing all that conversation, the group realizes what they really needed to do. And when the voice announces that the mission was about to start, all the members start running desperately toward the portal. But meanwhile, our hero was watching from afar, thinking that those guys were way too excited. And for him, the enhancement area, since he had Nick's ring, was basically giving him free bonus points. Even so, his main bonus was much better. For that reason, enhancement, along with a pet, would be necessary. Thus, time passes and the scene cuts to the leader's group defeating all those monsters at the portal. Observing the situation, the brown-haired one says that the enhancement crystal wasn't dropping much. The other guy says that it's because he wasn't desperate enough and should search for it, with the desperation of someone looking for their lost game cartridge. The boy asks what the hell that was supposed to mean, and the scene is cut again to another location, with the leader defeating one of the wolves using only his bare hands. And when he looks ahead, he notices that Se-young had finally obtained an enhancement crystal. The guy says that he was very lucky and had always been called the god of enhancement since he was a child. Seeing all the nicknames the boy had given himself, Lee wonders how many more he had. Shortly after, the boy approaches Se-young, but the guy says that this isn't something he could share, not even with him. However, Lee replies that he didn't want that, questioning what he was trying to enhance, because in reality he fought with his bare hands. And realizing that the guy had nothing to upgrade, Lee thinks that this guy was an idiot. That monster was disqualified from being his pet. Not only was it too small to ride, but it was also weak. Even so, there was still plenty of time so he could take the opportunity to look around. The scene cuts to another location, with Lee walking through the forest and only 1 hour and 54 minutes left until the tower ends. Lee, surprised, wonders how time passed so quickly since there were less than 2 hours remaining. He discovered some pet candidates, but they were far different from what he had expected. All of them had some undesirable trait. Frustrated, our hero thinks that the system should have told him exactly where to find one. He had already obtained 3 enhancement crystals. It hadn't been a complete waste of time, but if he didn't get a pet, reaching the 7th floor would have been pointless. At that moment, our hero looks to the side, noticing a shadow among the bushes. After making a jump, that creature finally appears. Lee, seeing the monster, thinks that it was incredibly ugly. There was no way the kangaroo would be his pet, but you should at least check it out, asking the monster to come at him with everything it had. Without wasting time, the monster jumps, throwing a punch for the protagonist. Lee, in turn, dodges the punch, but the kangaroo quickly counters. Even so, Lee barely manages to dodge in time. Observing the punch, the protagonist thinks that it was extremely heavy and had a lot of power. More importantly, it had incredible speed, and that came from its elastic leg muscles. The monster, speaking, asks what the boy thought of its attack. It is revealed that it wasn't actually Lee, but a projection of him. Lee is sure that the monster wasn't cute or friendly. However, it was the pet he had been searching for all this time. Shortly after, the system notifies him that he had become the master of that creature and asks him to give it a name. Our hero then thinks for a moment about the name and comes up with the idea of calling it Kangaso. The monster, in turn, seems happy with the name, and the protagonist thinks that its smile startled him. For that reason, he should look for a cuter pet. At that moment, a bright light flashes, and that creature apparently changes its form, leaving Lee very surprised by its new appearance. Thus, time passes, and the 7th floor mission had already been completed. Meanwhile, the group was looking at the monster that appeared. Shortly after, the protagonist arrives, telling the monster to greet everyone. The brown-haired one asks what was going on, and Lee replies that he had somehow managed to get an additional job as an animal tamer. The brown-haired one, in turn, asks if it really was somehow. Observing the situation, Lee thinks that it would be difficult to get away with such a weak excuse, so he should come up with a better one. Thus, the brown-haired one says that having only one class seemed too little for someone like him. So everyone starts clapping for the protagonist, saying that someone like him needed at least 2 classes. Everyone greets the monster, thinking that the group was apparently praising along with Lee. Shortly after, Lee picks up the monster and, changing the subject, asks if their equipment enhancement had gone well. The entire group suddenly changes expressions. Lee thinks that it seemed like it hadn't gone well, and besides that, he had a feeling that this would happen when they started falling behind. Looking to the side, Lee notices someone laughing, and it is revealed that another boy had obtained a high-grade adventurer's leather backpack. After that, a flashback appears in Lee's mind where he recalls that the hammer that guy had stolen had an effect that increased enhancement chances. Based on the information from his guide, that boy had probably succeeded in enhancing 3 times. For that reason, he was much smarter than he seemed. Shortly after, the other girl asks if the protagonist hadn't enhanced anything. Hearing this, our hero smiles and then pulls out a unique grade sword. Not only that, but also a unique grade armor, which he then equips. Lee's group is very surprised by his achievements, and meanwhile, Suyeon was shocked because she hadn't been able to enhance anything. Lee thinks that back then, he didn't know what would end up happening in the future. While everyone was celebrating, the torches began to go out. In the midst of that situation, the entire group became very confused. A voice spoke, saying that they all seemed to have improved a lot after the time they had spent apart. A silhouette then began to appear in the darkness. It was revealed to be the rabbit from before, saying that he thought they had a very comfortable time after he had left. Furthermore, he had prepared a little event for all of them since they must have been very bored. Taeyoung asked what kind of nonsense he was planning. The rabbit said that during all this time together, they had probably wished for someone else's ability. Shortly after, the rabbit seemed to perform an enchantment. After that, the torches lit up again, now glowing red. The rabbit said that to meet their needs, he had specially prepared that event, so they should enjoy it until their hearts were satisfied. The current mission was to kill players from the other areas. The reward was the ability to obtain a random skill from the player they defeated. Observing the situation, our hero thought that he already knew things had been too quiet. Looking ahead, he thought that he didn't know what kind of personalities they had, but normal people would prefer to avoid a situation where they had to kill each other. And if you could convince them, it might work. But shortly after, a weapon appeared in front of Lee. Without wasting time, another group grabbed their weapons. Extremely irritated, our hero told Suyeon to stop. She had already completely changed her expression. In the midst of that situation, Lee thought that he had believed that girls still had some humanity left. However, he had forgotten that before anything else, she was the assassin star. The two groups then began to face off, and their leader said that the fact she had pointed her weapon at him meant she desired war. Having no other choice, Lee thought that in the end, they would have to kill each other to fulfill the tower's desires. Meanwhile, that rabbit was laughing, thinking that they should give it their best in the fight. Shortly after, he said that he would take them to the battlefield. He hoped that everyone would have an enjoyable time. Thus, time passed and Lee was apparently asleep. After opening his eyes, he realized he was in a bed. A system screen appeared, informing that players who received that message must go to the other room within 10 seconds. If they didn't, they would be killed. After that, the countdown started, and without wasting time, Lee opened the door. After entering the other room, a voice said that a visitor had arrived. It was revealed to be the leader of the other group who was in the room, who was apparently level 25. The notification that told players they would die if they didn't move to the other room was a trap created by the tower to incite conflicts among the players. And if they ended up encountering their opponents in a heightened state of anxiety, there was a high chance they would fight each other. Even so, Lee wanted to know why that guy was so calm because he was even offering him water. Moreover, he had been chosen as the leader despite his low level, and because of that, he was not an ordinary person. The guy said that he had no intention of attacking, and if the group wanted to fight, they wouldn't have a choice, but they would like to avoid as much bloodshed as possible. Sitting in the chair, Lee also said that he didn't want to fight, wondering what he really meant by that. Shortly after, the guy said that too much blood had already been spilled, and he didn't want to get caught up in the tower's schemes, losing more precious companions. Hearing this, the boy was surprised and a flashback appeared in his mind, thinking that maybe he was just a victim of the tower, desperately trying to protect his companions. Koi asked if the boy felt that way and if he would be willing to cooperate. Without wasting time, the protagonist responded that yes, he would. Even if they agreed to work together, the rest of their teammates were all divided, asking how they could resolve that, thinking that if what he was seeing was correct, that skill was the only way to mediate their current situation. Koi said that there was a way to do it because he had a skill called telepathy. And if Lee could guarantee that his people wouldn't attack, he would use his telepathy to tell his teammates not to attack either. Lee, in turn, was surprised as that guy had a very rare skill. And by revealing it to an opponent who might want to take it, he was taking a big risk. But there was no other choice if he wanted to complete the mission without any sacrifices. For that reason, he had to finalize the negotiations. No matter what happened, Lee was determined to succeed. Lee says that his group is very pacifist, and as long as their opponents don't attack first, they would never be able to do it. However, there was one person who had joined his group along the way in the tower. Troy then assumes that it was that black-haired girl. Our hero responds that it was exactly her, but he wasn't able to control her. If she caused any problems, he would definitely stop her. Hearing this, Choi is surprised but still understands the situation, so he will trust the boy and send a telepathic message. Thus, time passes and Lee had apparently entered another room, saying that the negotiation with the opposing leader had ended well. So now he just needed to find Soyeon. When they completed the 7th floor mission, he had more than 50,000 gold and was able to buy a random skill box from the shop, which had been updated to level 5. Because of that, a skill he needed appeared at the perfect moment, allowing him to see players within the minimap of his location. This hotel was very small, with only 5 floors, and fortunately, everyone was safe for now. Moreover, Soyeon was already on the 5th floor. At that moment, our hero hears a noise. Surprised, he wonders what happened and then looks at his skill again, realizing that the point where Soyeon was had disappeared. Once again, the system forces everyone to switch rooms, and without wasting time, our hero moves to another place. After that, he opens the door, and it is revealed that the red-haired guy was in that room. Additionally, one of the other guy's teammates was dead. Lee, seeing that, becomes furious, and then asks the guy what he had just done, because he had gone through a lot of trouble to finalize his negotiations. However, the red-haired one looks very confused, asking what he was talking about, as that guy had suddenly attacked him while screaming to be killed. Hearing this, Lee says that it was absurd, and at that moment he receives a system message, informing him that the assassin star could see the number of people others had killed. Seeing the system windows, Lee realizes that it was a description of the assassin star's eyes, wondering why it had suddenly appeared. Shortly after, our hero seems to have an idea, thinking that she had probably seen the kill count of those guys back then. With tears on his face, the red-haired one says that he was telling the truth, asking if Lee didn't trust him. The boy, releasing the other guy, thinks that the pieces were finally coming together. Thus, time passes and Choi says that they were meeting again, which made things very interesting, asking Lee to sit while they drank. Our hero, irritated, asks if he thought this was just a coincidence. Besides that, he already knew everything, so he shouldn't pretend to be ignorant. Hearing this, Choi is surprised and then starts laughing, saying that Lee's skill was truly fascinating to the point that he wanted to kill and take it. Lee, in turn, thinks that this guy was really hiding his true nature, saying that for someone so greedy, he wanted to know why he was willing to lose his teammates just to kill others. Koi then smiles and after that throws his glass toward the protagonist. Without wasting time, the boy shatters the glass with his sword. However, this created an opening and without hesitation, more of Choi's subordinates appeared. Charging toward the protagonist, Choi says that if his army became stronger, then so would he. Since Lee was completely alone, he wouldn't be able to handle both him and his army. But at that moment, a bright light appears. One of Lee's monsters emerges in the midst of the situation and defends the attack. The protagonist responds that he was not alone. Choi, confused, asks what that thing was, saying that the kangaroo was really ugly. The monster, frustrated, asks what he had just said. In the midst of that situation, Lee admits that he couldn't deny it. Choi says that the more he got to know the boy, the more interesting he became, asking if he was sure he would be able to defeat them with just the two of them. Hearing this, our hero remains silent, and after a moment, he says that he would defeat them easily. Without wasting time, he charges at one of the subordinates and then strikes him. Another soldier was about to attack the protagonist, but at that moment, he is stopped by something, and looking down, he realizes that it was some kind of tail, which shortly after flings him against the wall. That protagonist, Kangaroo, was apparently doing an excellent job working as a team. Another subordinate charges at the group, but the Kangaroo notices it and then lands a punch, sending the guy flying into the wall. The Kangaroo, convinced, says that his movements are not very big, and Lee asks what the guy will do now since the army he was so proud of had been defeated. Choi, in turn, is surprised because his army was defeated so easily. Even so, he asks why they had not been killed. Because of his sensitivity, he was going to be killed. Right after that, the henchmen advance again towards the two, asking if he thought he could survive in the tower that way. While dodging the attacks, the protagonist asks if the kangaroo is okay and that, in the meantime, he's fighting the other henchmen. Lee wonders how the guys had suddenly become so energetic and why they had not seen any healing abilities. But when he looks closer, he realizes that the guys had not been healed, because the idiot burned his companion's life force to awaken them. Choi, in turn, responds that that was exactly it, and all of his stats were doubled in that state, asking if that ability really was not that intimidating. Lee, frustrated, says that all of his companions would die when they spent their life force, asking if someone like him, who treated his companions as disposable, dared to say that thing before. The guy asks not to be looked at that way because his life was the most important thing, asking if he had not come this far without blood on his hands. Lee replies that he was right because he was neither a hero nor a saint. However, if there was a way to save one more life, he would continue following the right path, because that is something a human being would do. Thinking that was why he also did not want to kill him. But if he did not stop him in that place, his teammates and other rooms would be in danger. Therefore, he needed to do something amidst that situation. Meanwhile, Cho is watching our hero, realizing that there was something different. Right after that, the guy's henchmen advance again towards Lee, who in the meantime seemed to be focused, where he breaks through the defense of those 3 henchmen and then advances towards the leader, who, after that, takes another hit. Thus, time passes again. Koi says that he is very unlucky because he encountered a monster like him not even in an official mission. Those guys by his side were just chess pieces that could be discarded at any moment. And while falling to the ground, Choi thinks that maybe he was wrong about that. After that, victory was given to the protagonist and the system announces that it would absorb part of his opponent's abilities. The scene then cuts to another location, with the brown-haired one asking if everyone had returned. Lee, looking around, is happy because everyone managed to survive. The same thing had happened with Soyeon. Right after, the protagonist approaches her, apologizing for what he had done before. However, the girl says that she should not have been wrong because she did not do it for them anyway. Pointing her weapon, she asks the boy to leave. As she starts walking away, our protagonist wonders why she became a star assassin because she does not seem inherently evil. That is why he thought she had her own circumstances. At the same moment, the other voice begins to speak, stating that the event had ended and the mission of the 8th floor would begin soon. Lee thinks that if he is right, the biggest challenge so far for him would be waiting for the next floor. And the stats he had difficulty increasing received a small boost in that fight. A fight depends on having stats and could be reversible at any moment. As he had said before, if there was a way to save one more life, he would continue following that path. Moreover, if he was powerless, all those words meant nothing, and he did not deserve to say any of that at that moment. To conclude, what he needed to improve now were his pure skills. Right after, the system announces that the mission of the 8th floor would be the renewal of eligibility chapters. Lee's group in the meantime was already fully gathered, fully prepared for the mission that was about to come. Sometime later, the group was apparently in front of a giant statue. Looking around, Lee says that all those people seemed to be sword fighters. Moreover, some of them stood out from the others. A system screen appears, and at the same moment, swords begin to appear in the player's hands. From that system screen, a silhouette appears, welcoming them to the 8th floor. Additionally, he was the caretaker of the middle section of the Tower of Apocalypse. Raising that banner, he responds that his name was Snuffles. Moreover, he hated being ignored, so they had to pay attention. That was the place for qualification renewal, where all the fighters from Sector B number 456 had been summoned. And only those who successfully renewed their qualification could reach the next floor. Thus, they should now begin the first stage of the mission. The system announces that they must form groups of 4 and then hunt the purple mammals. Meanwhile, everyone starts discussing the mission. Looking around, Lee thinks that there are a total of 36 people, and if they have to form groups of 4, it would be a new team. Even so, there was a problem as there were only 8 monsters to be hunted. The long-haired one says that the number of monsters does not match the number of groups, asking if that meant some would be eliminated. However, the rabbit says that was a stupid question, questioning if he thought he was there just for fun, asking if, by any chance, he was ignoring what he had said before. Then the rabbit calms down, saying that since this is the first stage, he will be generous and add a clear condition. The system announces that if someone kills another player inside the portal, it will be recognized as defeating a monster. After that, all the players are surprised by what they just saw. And amid that situation, Master Sore thinks that he already knew things were going to get ugly. Then the portal location appears, and without wasting time, all the players enter it. However, one of the people starts walking toward the portal, asking them to wait, questioning if there is anyone there who is an assassin. Lee, starting to observe the guy, seems surprised. Realizing that he was an assassin, he asks why he was looking for another. Everyone there becomes confused, asking what that guy had just said. Thus, they start ignoring the guy because they had no time for that. After that, everyone begins entering the portal. Seeing all this, the white-haired one is disappointed because he thought there would be at least one assassin. When the guy looks to the side, he comes across the protagonist group, asking if they would allow him to join that group. Thus, time passes and the scene cuts to inside the portal. The other girl, meanwhile, was wondering what had happened to that group, because everyone there was very good looking. Lee thinks that, in the end, he formed a group of 4, including the Star Assassin. Anyway, that was good because he would find out what he wanted while completing the mission. At that moment, the system appears, saying that a hidden piece was discovered in the northeast and a purple mammoth boss was trapped inside a barrier. Looking at the map, Lee thinks that the red dots are the monsters and the golden one must be the hidden piece, which meant that if they killed the monster, then there would be no need to kill anyone else. Thus, our hero takes the lead, asking the others to follow him. And amid that situation, the white-haired one says that he was not sure if he should believe the words of a low-level individual. However, he really managed to find the monster, asking if that was, by any chance, a hidden piece. The brown-haired one asks if the guy was not surprised because he was not someone who would be judged just by his level. The boy was not only strong, but also had a great personality, while the other girl says that he seemed very boring. Thus, the white-haired one starts analyzing the protagonist, saying that he does not seem to be much. Lee, nervous, wonders what was happening there, because the guy was using the assassin star's eyes to observe him. He always observed others, wondering if that was the feeling of being watched. The other girl, meanwhile, in the background was surprised because there was a lot of beautiful things to see. Observing the situation, she says that they need to break the barrier if they want to defeat that thing. And the brown-haired one says that his attacks did not even make a scratch. Lee, when opening his system screen, realizes that the barrier will probably open on its own after some time, because his guide does not give him something he cannot obtain. 4 monsters have already been killed so far, so something might happen soon. But at that moment, our hero hears a noise. When he looks back, he witnesses that horrifying scene, where that girl had been murdered by the white-haired guy. Lee, furious, asks what he was doing. The white-haired one says that he was just ensuring things because the barrier might not open in the end. The other boy asks if he had killed someone for such a reason, as that person was a member of his group. And amid that situation, Lee thinks that he was being too complacent because while he was worried that the assassin star might do something unexpected, that happened. While he was excited about discovering a hidden piece, he let his guard down against him. The guy then says that since they had reached that point, it would be better to simply kill everyone. That way, he could take the reward for himself. The other boy charges at the guy, saying that he won't allow that. As the two are about to fight, Lee intervenes in the situation, asking the boy to leave while thinking that he would make sure he was safe. But an aura pierces through the protagonist, being directed toward the boy from before, who, shortly after, collapses to the ground. Amidst that situation, our hero becomes very frustrated and begins recalling his past, thinking that he is still not strong enough to protect even a teammate, asking what had changed since then. Mocking Lee, the guy asks if he was standing still out of fear because that way it wouldn't be fun. But in reality, it was the opposite because Lee had a look of hatred, starting to observe the guy. Unexpectedly, that barrier ends up breaking. The monster, wasting no time, begins charging toward the two. An explosion happens after that, and several debris are scattered. Meanwhile, Lee is trying to escape while carrying the other boy on his back. After that, the two finally manage to hide. Lee thinks that fortunately, that boy is still breathing. As expected of the genius of predictions, he managed to avoid his vital points being hit. However, now that he saw that guy fighting, he was sure of something, because that man was definitely stronger than him, especially his exclusive ability called Aura Blade, because his aura moves separately from the trajectory of the sword, making it difficult to predict the direction of his attacks. Lee would like to kill the guy at that moment, but if he fought, he would probably be killed. But at the very least, he should try to hunt the boss first, and after that, figure out its movement patterns. Time passes again, and the boss has finally been defeated. The white-haired one thinks that Lee is stronger than he appears, and although he did not find a star assassin, he discovered something very interesting. Drawing his sword, he says that now that he has received the hidden reward, he will postpone killing him. Lee says that he wants to ask a question, questioning if he was looking for the star assassin. Right after, the guy changes his expression, asking what he knew about that. Once again, the scene cuts to another location, with Lee's group happy to have survived once more. The brown-haired one says that Lee saw himself being saved again, and the boy responds that he was happy that he was safe. When he looks to the side, the brown-haired one quickly changes his expression, saying that he wished that Lunatic had not survived. Right after, Lee begins to recall what had happened before when the guy asked what he knew about star assassins. Lee responds that he really knew that the guy was a star assassin. Thus, the guy starts laughing, saying that he was more interesting than he thought, asking what he wanted. Our hero responds that he would tell everything he knew about the assassins, but in exchange, he wanted him to answer his question. The white-haired one accepts the offer, but only if he likes what he hears. Lee says that there was a star assassin in his region who was a truly special person and had an exclusive star assassin weapon, where that person was probably the king of the star assassins. Surprised, the guy asks if such a thing existed. Amidst that situation, Lee thinks that he needed to find something huge like that to pique his interest. At that moment, the white-haired one approaches the protagonist, asking who those people were. Lee, in turn, gives a smile, thinking that the guy had finally taken the bait, asking if, by any chance, he was looking for information for free. Besides that, he wanted to know why he was searching for other star assassins. Returning to the present, Lee thinks that that guy is a psychopath because attacking others first is a characteristic of an assassin. Even so, he ended up obtaining some important information. Ever since he became Suyeon's primary target, he had been constantly worried about the Day of Blood, wondering if Suyeon might be thinking the same thing about it. Besides that, he wanted to know who that girl really was. Now that he discovered Kang's objective, he couldn't let him go. He would have to kill him on the next floor no matter what happened, even if it meant using everything he had. At that moment, a voice begins speaking in that room, asking who was the person that had done that. because someone ended up discovering a hidden piece. Someone discovered a hidden piece that he had a hard time concealing, and as a result, many players survived, because at least 4 people should have died in that place. People become very frustrated, asking what that had to do with anything. And the other man ends up assuming that a certain number of people must die in each mission. The rabbit responds that that is exactly the case and that he could simply kill randomly, but that would be too boring. Besides, there was a special reward for successfully killing a player, so they should choose their targets wisely. Amidst that situation, Lee thinks that the rabbit intended to reduce the number of players, no matter what happened. Shortly after, a voice says that the rabbit was being ridiculous because he just wanted to see others cutting each other down. Hearing this, the rabbit quickly changes his expression. The other guy asks if he was sure he should be talking to the administrator like that, but the guy didn't seem to care, because all the rabbit had done was threaten others and never actually hurt them before. Amidst that situation, Lee asks them to wait because he remembers a system message saying they should never anger the rabbit. However, it was already too late because the guy had already been hit, and part of his body is taken away by that attack. The rabbit says that he had already warned them before because he hated when people ignored him, asking if they thought they were in an isolated space just because they were on a screen, because they were wrong about something, as that was the Tower of the End, and it would be wise to discard any common sense they still had left. Now he will ask once again, questioning whether they will choose to sin or if they want him to kill them. Meanwhile, our hero remains silent. After that, the white-haired guy, along with the protagonist, raises his hands. Thus, time passes and the system announces that a special mission will begin. Lee thinks that this was the best thing that could have happened because now that he had decided to kill the rabbit, he would do whatever it took to get rid of that guy. The white-haired one says that this is unexpected because he has no intention of killing him yet, but thinking that he chose to target Sin was surprising. Questioning if he would be okay since Lee's abilities do not compare to his, Lee asks him to stop judging how strong his opponent is just by the number of people they have killed. Surprised, the white-haired one wonders if that boy knew about the eyes of the star assassin. Wasting no time, our hero charges at the guy, saying that there are many ways to become strong in that tower without killing. Amidst the battle, Lee thinks that he had already predicted this, because that guy was definitely stronger than him. Now that they were exchanging sword strikes, they were even more certain of it, because his sword attacks were very powerful and the only thing they could do was block them. Questioning if that, by any chance, was the strength of the star assassin, the white-haired one asks how they had reached that point because Lee hadn't even hit him, but he was far from satisfied. Besides, it wasn't good enough because he had high expectations and Lee needed to make it more entertaining. Lee says that he thought he really wasn't strong enough. However, that is what he would say if he were alone. At that moment, the kangaroo appears, striking down the white-haired one. Even so, the guy manages to stay standing after the attack. While dodging the blows, they wonder what that kangaroo was. Lee, attacking the guy from behind, asks if it was a little more fun now. The white-haired one, after dodging the attack, notices that he has a bloodstain, questioning how a fighter could control a summoner. Lee asks if he was afraid of a 2-on-1 fight, and the kangaroo says that this was what he called juice in the face. And the guy, very irritated, summons an aura onto his sword, saying that he will kill them both. Noticing that aura, our hero asks the kangaroo to move aside, thinking that while hunting the violet mammoth boss, he found a single weakness in Kang. Because while his aura was very powerful, it also consumed a lot of mana. Ever since he was hit by the kangaroo, Kang had been completely furious and continued using his abilities at full power recklessly. And because of that, his mana was dropping drastically. But there was still a problem, because it was extremely difficult to defend against those attacks. Now that he had his impeccable senses activated, he was at a level where he could react to them properly. And if he stayed alive until Kang's mana was completely depleted and used the ability he had saved until the last moment, he might have a chance, being able to win that fight. However, that did not happen because it was only a premonition. That kangaroo, unfortunately, had to sacrifice himself for the protagonist to stay alive. In the present, the boy wonders how that happened. After that, a flashback appears with Lee saying that as long as he was spinning that aura blade, there was no opportunity to land a decisive strike. While his attention was divided between him and the kangaroo, he was barely able to defend against the attacks. Even so, it was almost time for his MP to run out, at which point the aura might lose its sharpness. At that moment, the protagonist, along with the kangaroo, charges toward the guy, launching an attack together. However, something unexpected happens as both of their attacks fail, since they collided with each other. Noticing the opening, the white-haired one summons his aura blade again and then attacks once more. The scene then cuts to the present, where the kangaroo has been defeated. The only thing left of him were his boxing gloves. Lee, deeply shaken, wonders if that kangaroo had really been killed. The white-haired one, approaching the protagonist, says that now he was out of tricks. Even so, he admits that the boy was quite strong, but in the end, he was still right, because Lee ended up kneeling before him as he had relied on a mere pet. Right after, the protagonist responds that he was wrong. Picking up the kangaroo's glove, he says that he was not just a mere pet. Hearing this, the guy starts laughing, asking if Lee was his friend or even a teammate, and if, by any chance, he was really going to start with that kind of cliche, mentioning that the more people a human is connected to, the weaker they become. As he stands up, our hero says that maybe it really was a cliche. A flashback appears in the protagonist's mind saying that being together is what helps them keep living. At the end of the path of slaughter he was following, there would be nothing but loneliness. The guy, while listening to those words, says that it is nothing but nonsense. There was no need to hear any more of his words. Even so, it was amusing to see Lee continue fighting to hold onto whatever humanity he could, despite the end of the world approaching. That was why his pet had been dragged down, because the only thing that remained was death. After all that talk, Lee dodges backward. And while bleeding, our hero says that if it weren't for that kangaroo, he would have already been killed. Besides, it was because the kangaroo was there that the guy's mana was completely drained. That's why now he had to go all in. At that moment, the white-haired one leaps toward the protagonist, saying that he should just die already. Lee, summoning an aura onto his sword, says that now it's his turn. Thus, time passes and the battlefield is completely destroyed. Meanwhile, Lee is standing thinking that his sword skill leveled up at the last moment, and because of that, he got lucky and won the battle. However, using that ability consumes almost all of his mana, and it won't be very effective next time. His ability to destroy skills is something very useful, so he cannot overlook it. Besides, he was happy because he finally defeated a star assassin. However, there were still things he had failed to protect. Lee wanted to apologize to the kangaroo, but even so, he thanked him for his help. At that moment, the system appears, informing that a summoned monster, when killed, can be summoned again in 24 hours, completely breaking the mood of the moment. At the same instant, the rabbit appears, saying that it was a very unexpected result, mentioning that he liked humans who listened to what he said and wanted to congratulate him on his victory. But he shouldn't get too excited just yet, since the star assassin was dead, and the missions would become much more difficult from that moment on. Lee asks what the rabbit meant by that, and the rabbit responds that it was exactly as he had said. Because star assassins are not just strong people who happen to receive benefits from the tower, they are also tied to part of its difficulty. And since one of the assassins is dead, the tower's missions will become more severe. Lee wonders if that meant that the more star assassins die, the harder it will be to climb the tower. However, if he doesn't do it, tragedies on the Day of Blood will happen. Wondering what he should do now. Changing the subject, the rabbit says that in any case, he managed to defeat the assassin player. So he will proceed with the second mission along with the special reward he had promised. At that moment, Lee is apparently teleported to another location. Looking around, Lee asks if that is the location of the second mission, mentioning that he has seen this place before, assuming that it might be the reward he had also seen before. When he looks back, he comes across an old man sleeping. Then the system appears with a mission to train in the mind dimension of the temple and achieve proper growth. Lee, surprised, wonders if this is some kind of training out of nowhere, and besides that, the mission details are very vague. It was a relief that this was not a mission against other players. The rabbit says that he initially intended to give out a random box ability, but since Lee had completed a high difficulty achievement, he would grant a special reward instead. Returning to the present, Lee starts waking up the old man, asking who he was. Besides that, he wanted to know if the reward was him and if, by any chance, it wasn't supposed to be a better random ability. Shortly after, the old man stands up, questioning if Lee was really asking who he was, because he would be the one to become Lee's master. His name is Celestial Demon. Lee wonders if this was the celestial demon that appears in martial arts webtoons because he seemed a bit different from what he knew. At that moment, the old man strikes the boy's head, saying that he knew he was having impure thoughts. Our hero thinks that he managed to read the guy's attack, but could not react to it at all. The old man says that Lee is as weak as trash and that he will do it again, so he should take a good look and try to block it. Having no other choice, Lee accepts the offer, mentioning that he let the attack hit him because he wasn't expecting it, but he wouldn't lower his guard the second time. Thus, the boy activates his impeccable senses. Even so, he gets hit again. The old man, surprised, says that for a piece of trash, he at least knew how to use energy detection, asking to what extent he could use it since his body couldn't keep up. Lee wonders if he really couldn't keep up because his agility was already at its limit. Shortly after, the old man says that he wasn't just talking about being fast or slow and changing his stance, he asked the protagonist to try attacking him, using the strongest martial arts technique he had. Amidst that situation, Lee accepts the offer, thinking that he needed to ignore the fact that the opponent was an old man, because that guy was a monster whose attributes he could not decipher. His strongest sword technique was an ability he could only use once. He would show him if that's what he wanted. At that moment, our hero summons his aura and then strikes it toward the old man. However, the old man easily manages to split the aura, shattering all of Lee's expectations about his ability. Shortly after, the old man says that at the very least, he was a piece of trash with some substance, mentioning that no matter what kind of sorcery he used with that sword, it wasn't its true technique. And for him to teach him his techniques would have to get rid of the sorcery Lee had within. Reluctantly, our hero asks if he wanted him to get rid of his swordsmanship ability, because that was the basic system of the tower. The old man says he doesn't know about those things, and Lee thinks that he can't allow him to do that, because if it weren't for his swordsmanship abilities, he wouldn't have survived up to this point. For this round, he would die if he didn't reach a certain level of growth within the time limit. Time was running out at that exact moment, and he wondered if the guy still wanted him to start from scratch. even after going through so much just to reach intermediate swordsmanship. The old man says that the smaller the container, the more one thinks that everything is within it, and it was natural to feel like it would be a bit of a waste to throw it away. He had no intention of forcing anyone to be his disciple against their will, which is why Lee had to make his decision soon, asking if he would live forever as a frog in a well or choose to be reborn through his teachings. Mentioning that there were countless people who would risk their lives to receive his teachings, and Lee wasn't even realizing the magnitude of the opportunity he had. A flashback appears in Lee's mind, making him think that the guy was right because he had felt that before, and there were limits to his strength when he relied only on abilities or stats. Having no other choice, our hero ends up accepting the offer. Bowing to the old man, he asks him to teach him, thinking that from this point on he would be reborn into something better. Thus, time passes, and Lee thinks that even though his sword handling ability was removed, he managed to recover all the progress he had previously made. The system announces that a doppelganger had been killed, and the boy thinks that he had become much stronger than before. That only took 3 days, or he didn't even know how long it had taken to achieve that. However, he had already surpassed his past self even before half of the sand had passed through the hourglass. Meanwhile, the old man was observing Lee from the top of the hourglass. Descending, the man says that he had finally overcome his inner self, and Lee replies that it was thanks to his teachings. However, the old man tells him to be quiet because even so, he was still trash. Observing the protagonist, the old man begins to think that the boy is more promising than expected. Because of that, he might have potential that surpasses any disciple of his cult. Sitting down, the old man says that they would now enter the master-disciple relationship, so he must show respect and perform the ritual of the 9 bows. Lee, surprised, asks if they weren't already in a master-disciple relationship. The old man questions whether Lee would call someone his master just for teaching him how to walk, mentioning that what he would teach now was the exclusive sword technique of the divine cult, known as the strongest technique in the world. Its name was the Mi-Shadowless Soul Hunting Technique. People called him the strongest in Morin's history, and unified the 7 branches of the celestial demonic divine cult at the age of 28. After that, he ascended to the position of celestial demon, and people said that the strongest celestial demon had been born. After dedicating his entire life to the sword, he achieved unification and ascended as a deity, and then somehow, he ended up in this tower. Hearing the whole story, Lee asks if that meant he was also trapped in this tower. However, the old man says that's nonsense because although he was obligated to play a role in the tower due to a pact, he was not trapped in it. Our hero thinks that based on what he had said, it wouldn't be as if he were an NPC from that world. Changing the subject, the old man says that he cannot give more details about his pact with the tower, but even so, Lee would learn a sword technique from a great person like him. Bowing, our hero says that he will be under his care from now on. Annoyed, the old man asks what was up with that lukewarm reaction, and if he hadn't just heard what he said. He was going to learn the shadowless soul hunting sword technique, because if he had done this for a disciple of the divine cult, they would have cried for 3 days straight out of gratitude, questioning if, by any chance, the boy felt nothing. Lee thinks it's because he had never heard of that technique before, saying that if that were the case, he didn't have time to cry, because if he wanted to learn such an incredible sword technique, he shouldn't waste time and should focus on learning it. Hearing this, the old man ends up liking his words, stating that from now on, he should train with the determination to put his life on the line. Time passes again, and Lee thinks that his swordsmanship ability had been removed from the status window because he was following the same steps he had walked before. It wasn't very difficult for him to return to the same level he was at before, but this technique was really different. It was slow, then fast, and at the same time, strong and then gentle. Observing from a distance, the old man says that this was a technique that the strongest person in the world spent his entire life perfecting, questioning if Lee thought he would learn it so easily. Lee thinks that even a mere branch seemed desirable to him at that moment, saying that he didn't know if he was doing it correctly because after he started learning the technique, he felt as if his skills were deteriorating. Hearing this, the old man seems surprised, and after that, he descends from his branch, saying that if that were the case, they should fight immediately. Lee thinks that he had just defeated his doppelganger, and now the guy wanted him to fight against him. The old man questions why Lee is just standing there if he, by any chance, wanted him to be the one to make the first move. Grabbing his sword, our hero thinks that the sand in the hourglass was falling as they spoke. Charging at the old man, he affirms that now was not the time to overthink things. After that, he launches an attack at the old man, who easily dodges. And as Lee continues to attack multiple times, that man effortlessly dodges every single one of his strikes. Then moments later, he is standing on top of Lee's head. Our hero tries to hit the old man, but is practically impossible. Wondering what kind of ghostly movement this was because he couldn't land a single strike. At that moment, the old man starts attacking and Lee thinks the blow will be to the head, so he will block it and then counterattack. Surprisingly, Lee ends up getting hit anyway. Thinking that he had predicted that move, he wonders why he still got hit. The old man asks if Lee really thought he could predict his attacks with those inferior senses. It was true that this might have worked up until now. As soon as the boy hesitated or if someone used a dodge, then his prediction could be easily deceived. Lee, frustrated, wonders what that old man might be thinking. Only a quarter of the sand remained in the hourglass, and he was getting more and more confused, questioning if learning that technique was really the right thing to do, because at this rate, he might end up running out of time. Then the old man orders him to cast away his anxiety, to throw away everything he had relied on until now and feel the end. At that moment, a shining leaf reappears. Behind the old man, a giant tree was glowing. The old man says that whether something has substance or not, they all have a single end. If he could feel that end, he would be able to cut anything. The shadowless, soul-hunting sword technique is a sword technique that casts no shadow. Its purpose is mentioned in its name, and it exists to cut even the existence of things without substance. Thus, Lee begins to recall all the attacks he had received from the old man, where he apparently realized something. Shortly after, the old man tells him to try attacking him again. Lee, without wasting time, picks up his sword again, and for the first time, he manages to break through the old man's defense. After that, the branch breaks, and the old man seems pleased with this, because the boy had turned into a rather useful piece of trash. Approaching the young man, he informs him that he had just obtained a fragment of understanding. Lee responds that now he is able to comprehend some of his teachings, even if only a little. The old man thinks that although he had drawn the trajectory of his sword so that Lee could feel the end in the easiest way, not everyone is capable of perceiving it, saying that the boy should remember something because the principle of the sword technique is not to fill empty spaces with meaningless mass. After countless instances of discarding, the moment when one reaches a singularity is when they will truly master the sword technique. Lee, hearing this, is surprised, thinking that if he had been lured by benefits and focused only on acquiring abilities in quantity instead of quality, he would not have been able to obtain the sword technique. It was like saying that no matter how elegant someone's hair was, it would never shine as brightly as a bald head. Reading the protagonist's thoughts, the old man becomes extremely frustrated, asking if he was still asking to get beaten up. At that moment, unfortunately, the hourglass reaches its end. Lee then thanks him for all his teachings, saying that he will take his advice seriously and climb to the very end of that tower. Hearing this, the old man seems pleased and then hands the protagonist a set of clothes, saying that a disciple of the celestial demon cannot walk around dressed like a beggar, thinking that as he continues to climb the tower, they will probably meet again. Thus, that room seems to begin dissolving and the system announces that the mission has been completed. After that, Lee is once again teleported back to the tower. Looking around, the boy wonders where he is because he had not returned to the gladiator's lobby. At that moment, the boy senses a presence behind him. Thinking that he had been summoned to that rabbit's space, he asks why he was summoned there. Shortly after, the creature says that it had something to propose to him, asking if he knew that there was now an open spot for a star assassin since Kang had been killed. Therefore, it wanted the boy to accept that position. Surprisingly, our hero asks if he could refuse the proposal. The rabbit says that the rules state that it cannot force him to become a star assassin. However, if they met again, he had no idea what he would do because he hated people who did not take his words seriously. Lee wonders if he hadn't just said that he couldn't force him. This was probably a threat. If he ended up becoming a star assassin, everything he had built up until now would collapse. Things didn't seem good, so he had to escape from there by any means necessary. However, with his current strength, he couldn't even comprehend what the rabbit's limits were, wondering what he should do. At that moment, the system announces that a guide had been sent to the boy, informing him that once he passes the gladiator's mission, he will be reverted to the starting point of the 8th floor mission, beginning again from the Tamer mission. Lee, realizing that he will regress, wonders if that is really possible. Even so, he wanted to know what that had to do with anything, assuming that if he returned to the starting point of the 8th floor mission, that guy would probably be revived. Thus, the boy apparently had an idea, where shortly after, he accepts the offer and drinks the chalice, announcing that since things had come to this, he would become a star assassin. With a smile on his face, the rabbit says that the boy is really interesting. At that moment, the red system notification informs that he has become an assassin, and all of his stats have increased. Lee, realizing that he regained his swordsmanship ability, remembers that his master had taken it away before. Thus, the system announces that swordsmanship ability no longer exists and that Aura Blade cannot be supplemented. Because of this, he must receive another weapon and an alternative common ability. Time passes again, and Lee is apparently back in the gladiator's lobby. The brown-haired one, noticing the protagonist, is very happy that he is safe. The guy, surprised, asks what kind of speed that was because he couldn't keep up with his movements. Questioning how much stronger he had become, Lee replies that it seemed like Juno had also improved a lot. The brown-haired one says that now that he is looking closely, the boy has also changed his clothes. Because of that, he looks much more presentable. Lee thinks that he was worried that they would be robes or some martial arts clothes like his master wore, but he had been given really good clothing. When he looks to the side, our hero notices something, because very few people had returned. Shortly after, that rabbit appears, saying that things are starting to get exciting, and the last mission will be more brutal than any before. and he is eager to see how many of them will survive. With a snap of his fingers, he tells them to keep fighting their best until the end. In a matter of seconds, the group is teleported to an arena, and several monsters are surrounding them. The yellow-haired one thinks that this is the arena known as the Gladiator's Grave, and this might be his final mission. He can sense the energy of a purple mammoth, which 4 people from each Iron Lion group had struggled to kill. Because of that, this place could end up becoming his grave. His name was Sing-Yeon, and he was a swordsman. Charging at the lions, he thinks that he cannot just die like that. But surprisingly, someone lands an attack on one of the lions, leaving the audience and the rabbit very shocked by what they had just witnessed. Then it is revealed that it was Lai standing at the back, and he also had a weapon in his hand, saying that this was better than he had ever imagined before. Thus, the boy had finally become a star assassin. The yellow-haired one, seeing all of that from a distance, seemed very confused. After that, a system notification appears, informing that Lai has successfully renewed his gladiator qualifications and completed the 8th floor, so he is returning to the lobby. Shortly after, Lai is teleported to another location. Looking around, he realizes that this is the Tamer's lobby, assuming that he had really gone back in time. Without wasting time, the boy begins analyzing his stats, noticing that the Star Assassin trait had disappeared because Kang had come back to life and his Star Assassin slot had been filled again. When he looks at his inventory, he is surprised because that weapon was still there. Since he doesn't have the magic bullet ability, it is useless, but still, it might be better to keep it stored. A flashback appears in his mind of when he had defeated Shu, and also from the last battle he had where Junyu had been hit, thinking that he should send a message to Junyu to warn him about Kang in advance. Thus, time passes again and Lai thinks that since he has warned Junyu about this, he should be able to survive safely. Without wasting time, the boy tries to summon his pet. Then the kangaroo finally appears. With tears on his face, the boy says that he had missed him. That's why he is so happy that he is safe. The irritated monster tells the boy to get away from him. Shortly after, a guy appears behind the protagonist, saying that the creature is really beautiful. Asking how something like that survived, Lai thinks that this guy is strange. At that moment, the boy gives a smile, asking if the monster was meant to become food for his dog. Lai, irritated, asks what he just said. Then the rabbit appears, welcoming them to the 8th floor as the intermediate administrator of the Tower of the End. Meanwhile, our hero is extremely frustrated, wondering how the guy dared to treat his pet as food. Meanwhile, the rabbit is explaining everything from before and informing them that you will now share the details of the first phase mission, where they must fight in a pet battle against the players and win. Meanwhile, Lai is wondering why there are only 4 people there when the rules are quite flexible. Without wasting time, the rabbit orders them to start the battle immediately. The other guy says that it seems like their fate has united them as opponents. At that moment, the pet transforms, saying that it will make sure he never barks again. The guy observing the protagonist's pet says that it is not a normal pet. Because of that, it's even better, ordering his dog to charge at that kangaroo. At that moment, the dog attempts to attack, but Lai blocks it with his sword. Managing to counterattack along with the kangaroo, Lai thinks that the dog has decent power and speed along with having 2 heads. They are quite good, but this is where a tamer's weakness becomes apparent. If they raise their pet well, it's expected that they will have a much stronger pet. However, since they focus only on the growth of their pet, it was inevitable that their own abilities would fall below average. Because of this, as the pet has to protect its master, its fighting range is restricted. That's why he now understands why there weren't many tamers left, ordering the kangaroo to finish it quickly. At that moment, the 2 charge at the dog. Time passes again, and the frustrated guy asks how that was possible, and how a tamer was so good with a sword. Even so, the man had not given up yet, ordering the dog to use its shred ability. With a leap, it lunges at the 2. Lai, along with the kangaroo, easily dodges the attack, starting to circle around the dog multiple times. As a result, the dog becomes confused and then knocks its heads together. Lai, along with the kangaroo seeing the opportunity, charges at the beast, thinking that back then he focused only on attacking and ruined his teamwork with the kangaroo, but now he could feel something, because the sword trajectory could bring out the best combination between the kangaroo's punch and his sword, mentioning that this tamer mission was his second chance to make things right. Thus, just as Lai obtained that gladiator sword technique in this mission, he and the kangaroo could improve even further. Time passes again, and Lai has finally been teleported back to the gladiator's lobby. Without wasting time, the brown-haired one approaches the protagonist, asking what a star assassin is. Hearing this, our hero, along with Sueyan, is surprised. Sometime before that question, everyone was very happy to have survived. Lai thinks that everyone had safely renewed their qualifications, so it was a relief. The brown-haired one says that they survived thanks to Lai's ability because he had a telepathy skill. The red-haired one asks if he really had that ability and says he should have used it on him earlier because he was so scared that he had to do the mission alone. The other girl also says that she was feeling upset, and Lai says that next time he will definitely use it on them. Meanwhile, Sueyeon seems frustrated and Lai wonders if she was also upset. Hearing that, the brown-haired one becomes very happy, saying that it meant Lai trusted him. Meanwhile, our hero seems apprehensive, thinking that not everyone managed to return and that it was even more depressing that everyone was trying to hide their sadness. The scene cuts back to the present with that boy asking what a star assassin is. The group around them also looks confused by the question. Lai thinks that before he was trying to show how dangerous Kang was and mentioned the star assassin status, now wondering what to do. Shortly after, he realizes that they were almost at the point of advancing to the 9th floor, informing them that a star assassin might be someone who controls the difficulty of the tower. At that moment, a voice announces that they will be sent to the 9th floor in an hour, so they should continue training. Meanwhile, Lei's group was doing exactly that, and the damn vendor guy was still alive. Our hero was also doing the same, training some sword techniques, thinking that the shadowless, soul-hunting sword technique was really difficult to use. Shortly after, Suyeon appears saying that they need to talk, and Lai thinks that she has taken the bait, thinking that before he had briefly become a star assassin and managed to discover crucial information about the Day of Blood. After their groups merged, Suyeon hadn't been able to kill many people, and there was a high chance she would trigger the 10th floor, the Day of Blood. His objective was to use the card in his hand to overturn her decision. The boy asks what she wanted and if she was, by any chance, trying to say that she was a star assassin. Hearing this, the girl is surprised and asks what the hell he is talking about. Grabbing his weapon, he asks her not to try so hard to hide it because he is also a star assassin. The girl, surprised, wonders if Lee is really a star assassin. She supposes that it would make sense because he has all those abilities if he were one. Shortly after, the girl starts analyzing the protagonist who had a number on his head, saying that Lee is not a star assassin, and the boy asks if it's because he has killed too few people. That's why she shouldn't rely too much on the star assassin's eyes. The girl, surprised, realizes that Lee knows about the assassin's eyes, and because of that, she starts believing that he really is one of them, saying that they should assume he is a star assassin. Drawing her weapon, she asks how he knew whether she was one of them or not. Besides trying to guess someone's kill count, there is no ability that allows someone to know who is a star assassin. Lee responds that he can see absolutely everything from her class, her attributes, even the amount of gold she has. Disbelieving, the girl tells him not to try to deceive her because no such ability exists. Our hero, grabbing that weapon, states that the girl has 350 mana, and with that much, she could use multiple magic bullets as much as she wanted. Her stamina is 51 and her strength has increased by 3 points. Shortly after, the girl asks him to stop because she's already understood. Lee thinks that he is almost done, and now that he has planted in her mind the idea that he might be a star assassin, she cannot choose the Day of Blood recklessly, because he would receive a penalty if he killed a star assassin, and the girl says she has a question. Lee, in turn, is curious, wondering what she wants to know. She could do whatever she wanted because she would only end up moving exactly where he wanted her to. The girl then asks if he's a great star assassin, leaving Lee confused by that. At that moment, that voice appears again, saying that the break is over. In a matter of seconds, the entire group is teleported to the 9th floor. Lee, looking around, wonders where the others went, assuming that this is another solo mission. When he looks back, he is in disbelief at what he sees. An unknown woman appears in that place, saying that Lee has grown a lot. And the mission is simply the chapter of the dead, where the people he knew who died while climbing the tower and became the dead will appear before him. Lee, shaken, asks how the director is there. After that, a flashback from a few years ago appears. A boy was asking Lee to give something back, and the protagonist responds that he hadn't taken anything. Slamming the table, the boy asks him not to lie because someone saw him stealing his wallet. Another boy in the background says that it was true, so he should return what belongs to him, and Lee thinks that back then, he really didn't steal that guy's wallet. And he clearly remembered the reason he did that to him. It was because he had taken first place during the midterm exams of the 2nd semester. Standing up, the protagonist says that he is not a beggar. The other boy asks why he is standing up like that, mentioning that orphans like him live off the taxes taken from rich people, asking if that didn't make him a beggar. Hearing that, the protagonist becomes very frustrated and then punches the guy, thinking that fights between 10-year-old boys start by insulting each other's families. That's why he was frustrated hearing the insults about the orphanage and the people who live there. At that time, he thought it was justice, but in reality, it only made things worse. The other woman says that he was an orphan and should act like one, questioning how he dared to hit her son in the face. The other woman on the ground starts apologizing multiple times, saying that it was all her fault. Meanwhile, Lee was watching that whole situation from afar, unable to do anything, thinking that at that time he had realized something, that justice without strength would only generate more injustice. After that, the boy decided never to stand out in the crowd again, looking away even when he saw injustice being committed. He would exist, but he wouldn't let his presence be known, as if he had no color, all because he didn't have enough strength to protect anyone. Returning to the present, the mission is given to kill the monsters that kill the dead and release their souls. Lee, looking ahead, comes across an enemy monster, wondering if that woman had died to a mere one-horned raccoon. Frustrated, Lee apologizes to the director for not being able to protect her. A flashback appears again with the boy saying that she had been struck because of him. The director asks how long he will keep being so formal by calling her director when she'd at least try calling her mother. She then hugs Lee, saying that everything will be fine because what she was doing was the duty of a parent, to protect their child. Returning to the present, the director says that there was no need to apologize. Besides that, he had grown a lot and was now finally capable of protecting others. He was kinder and stronger than anyone she knew, so he must help those in need, becoming a light in that world. Lee thinks that before, he tried to be as discreet as possible, but now he was only trying to follow her teachings after the world had turned into this. The scene shifts back to the raccoon, which starts charging toward the director. Lee easily grabs the raccoon, thinking that the director will probably disappear once he kills it. However, the director tells him not to hesitate because now he has other people to care for and protect. That's why he should simply keep following the path he is meant to walk. Hearing this, our hero remains silent, but shortly after, he rises again. Drawing his sword, he throws the raccoon into the air, thinking that climbing the tower of the end was to destroy it and restore the world to what it once was. After that, Lee finally finishes off the creature, questioning if this was really the path he needed to follow. With tears on his face, he tells the director to rest in peace now, bidding farewell to his mother. The scene then shifts to another location where a girl appears to be fighting a monster. Shortly after, she begins healing all her wounds, thinking that she couldn't endure this anymore. A flashback appears in her mind with a man asking her to grab the bag, saying that he only felt bad because she had to attend school even during vacation, asking if she shouldn't take care of her own body before becoming a pharmacist. Laughing, the girl says that he was weird, and the man asks why she was laughing since this wasn't a joke. She says she knew that, and after that, she thanks the man. As she starts walking away, the man says he has training, so she should make sure to take it easy. When he looks back, the man sees a metal bar falling, heading straight toward the girl. Then, a loud noise occurs, and the people around are horrified by what happened. The man lying on the ground asks if the girl is okay, and when she looks at his condition, she is shocked. The scene shifts back to the present after the girl recalls all her memories, thinking that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't have lost his lay in his dream of becoming a national athlete. At that moment, the soul of that man appears, beginning to blame her for everything that had happened, and the only thing the girl can do is apologize. The orc appears again, and meanwhile, the girl keeps apologizing for everything she had done. At that moment, a voice tells her to pull herself together. When she opens her eyes, she realizes that Lee is there, asking if she was listening, saying that he didn't know how the dead man was connected to her or what kind of past they had. Even so, she must keep doing this, taking down the orc and helping the dead to rest in peace. However, the girl says that the man lost everything because of her, and if he hadn't lost his leg, he wouldn't have lost his life in the tower, asking how she could possibly take his life again. Hearing this, the protagonist calls out to her again, saying that he knew it was difficult and that it probably meant a lot to her, but even so, she had said before that she wanted to become stronger. Shortly after, the protagonist grabs the orc and then slams it into the ground. Observing the girl, he notices that she was being consumed by the thoughts of the spirits, saying that she really couldn't do this. Lee asks if the man had told her that he lost everything because of her. That's why she should analyze it more carefully, asking if she really thought he would have thought that way, and if someone who truly admired her would blame her for his misfortune. The scene shifts back to the past with the man in the hospital, asking why she had that expression and who was about to cry. With a smile on his face, he tells her not to cry because he will buy new supplement pills for her. After that, the spirit embraces the girl, who says that this was exactly the kind of person he was. He stepped forward even though it was dangerous and always put others before himself. The young man was someone like the sun and saw Lee in his place. Right after that, the orc gets up again, but then someone lands an attack on him. It is revealed that it was that girl, leaving Lee very surprised by what had happened. After defeating the orc, the girl thanks him because that would be a farewell. Time passes again, with Lee saying that the crucial point of that mission is not the monsters but the fight against regrets. They need to accept the death of their loved ones and bid them farewell. So this might be the most difficult mission they have had so far. They only had 3 hours left, and he managed to help that healer girl because she was near where he was, but he couldn't help everyone. The only thing he could do was encourage them via telepathy, which is why he trusted that everyone would be able to overcome their own struggle. The scene cuts to Suyen, who apparently was on a pedestal. Looking back, she says she knew the boy would come there. Then it is revealed that it was the protagonist standing there, asking if he had made her wait. He thinks that whether the Day of Blood happens on the 10th floor or not will depend on the votes of the assassin stars at the altar hidden on the 9th floor. If they agree, they will place a red crystal on the altar, and if they don't, they will place a blue crystal instead. Although no one knows how many assassin stars exist, if the 10th floor is designated for the Day of Blood, several areas will merge and then it will begin. When that happens, the assassin stars will kill other players since that is their role. Observing the other girl, Lee thinks that she must also have important people to her, but she doesn't seem affected. He assumes that it's because someone's emotions become dull when they become an assassin star. Approaching the girl, Lee says they don't have time, so they should finish what they were discussing before the lobby, asking why she thinks he is a great assassin star. She replies that thinking about it, most of the boy's decisions were correct, and it was as if he could foresee the entire future. Lee asks if that means she decided to trust his authority, thinking that he doesn't know what a great assassin star is, but it's advantageous for him if she thinks that way. The girl responds that it's true and asks what he plans to do now and if by any chance he wants the 10th floor to be the Day of Blood. Our hero replies that to be honest, he thinks the 10th floor is too soon for the Day of Blood, and the girl questions what he means by that. Lee says that even with the assassin stars, they still need to climb to the end of the tower. Although they don't know where the upper floor is, they are sure they have many more floors to climb. And if they kill players only on the 10th floor, he asks how long the assassin stars could survive in the tower. He mentions a saying that when the rabbit dies, the dog is cooked. Those who have already outlived their usefulness will definitely be abandoned by the tower, and that's why he thinks they should postpone the Day of Blood as much as possible. Lee thinks that although he has done something to persuade her, it's not implausible, especially since the assassin stars are nothing more than pawns for the tower. The problem is that even if he persuades her, there are other assassin stars who disagree, so they cannot prevent the Day of Blood from happening. And if this comes to light, you will eventually have to fight her. Right after, Suyeon takes a blue crystal, saying that she is beginning to think that everything that has happened so far was destiny at that point. She mentions that each of the assassin stars receive unique information. After that, the girl starts using the crystal, throwing it towards the altar. She states that she knew how to turn things around in that tower. After that, the altar begins to glow and the system announces that a hidden piece has been used. At that very moment, they are teleported to another location, and the system instructs them to hunt the Black Blood Wolf, with the remaining time being 50 minutes. Seeing the mission, Lee says that if they complete it, they could postpone the Day of Blood regardless of what the other assassin stars vote for. He is very surprised that the girl has a hidden piece, wondering if this is really some kind of fate. Right after, the girl says they are in trouble in that mission. They have to defeat the Black Wolf in 50 minutes and question how they will find it among all those mountains. At that moment, he remembers that the girl had a terrible sense of direction. Time passes again, and he appears to be carrying the girl on his back, while the kangaroo is carrying both of them. After that, the creature leaps downward and ends up finding that wolf. Seeing the creature, the girl is surprised because it really managed to find it. At that very moment, the wolf lets out a roar and Lee thinks that the pressure is unbelievable. Since he didn't have the perfect shield, he couldn't use the same method he had used back then. Now he has Suyeon, who can deal damage from a distance. He says that he and the kangaroo will attract the wolf's attention, and when it gets distracted, she should take the chance to hit. Drawing her weapon, the girl says that she will follow his instructions for now, but he shouldn't think that she was his subordinate just because he was the great assassin star. Hearing that, the protagonist smiles, saying that it is good enough. Right after, the young man uses his sword technique that he had learned while the kangaroo is supporting Lee, allowing them to land a sequence of attacks on the creature. Lee wonders if it worked, but the monster is still standing, apparently planning something. Observing the situation, the protagonist says that it's poison and tells everyone to dodge as the creature releases its venom. Lee thinks that its coverage area is huge, and because of that, it could really die if they made a mistake. Without wasting time, the monster charges for the protagonist, who dodges with a jump. Even so, the creature manages to hit Lee, sending him flying. Suyeon charges at the wolf again, thinking that her magic bullet ability is more effective when she's closer to her target. After that, she fires her bullet, but the monster is still standing. The kangaroo barely manages to land a hit, saving the girl, but as a consequence, it ends up being grabbed by the creature. Observing the situation from a distance, Lee tries to dispel the summoning. At that moment, the kangaroo disappears. The girl says that her magic bullets weren't working and asks what she should do now. Lee thinks that if he masters the hunter's sword technique, he can hit anything, but at his current level, he can't even cut off one of the wolf's legs. He wonders what his master would do in that situation. Lee and the girl begin attacking the monster again. The creature then releases its venom again, and the girl barely manages to dodge. Trying to attack the protagonist, the creature fails as Lee also manages to dodge its attacks. He starts to think that his vision is getting blurry and wonders if it's because the poison has entered his body. Neither his sword techniques nor the girl's abilities are working against the wolf. They haven't even managed to scratch it, making them question what they should do now. Right after, the protagonist starts analyzing the creature more carefully. It seems like he notices something. Then he asks the girl if she can prepare to fire a powerful attack. Surprised, she wonders if the boy has actually come up with a solution. Even though he is injured, his eyes still show determination. A powerful attack takes a long time to prepare, so she can only use that ability once in the battle. Because of that, she has no choice but to believe in Lee. Meanwhile, the protagonist is thinking that the reason his sword technique couldn't cut was because of one thing. It was because he tried to cut the creature with a single strike. With his current strength, he can't feel the limit to cutting it in just one attack. He wonders what would happen if he only focused on cutting its skin. After that, the boy closes his eyes to concentrate. Thinking that he learned the strongest sword technique in the world, he must be able to cut through its skin. At that very moment, the wolf charges at the protagonist, who then opens his eyes, saying that he would be too ashamed to face his master if he couldn't defeat it. Meanwhile, Suyeon also seems to have her eyes closed, thinking that the magic bullets she usually uses are in the shape of a sphere. As a result, the impact when hitting a surface is reduced and its penetration power is insufficient. If she manifests the magic bullets in a shape similar to that of a real bullet, it would be much better, and the penetration power would be on another level. After all that, their attacks seem to be ready. Lee then charges at the monster. The other girl also fires her shot, hitting the wolf's head directly. Surprisingly, they manage to defeat it. Thus, the battle is over and all of them are completely exhausted. Either way, they had managed to win. The girl asks if that was the end, and the protagonist tells her to wait. Starting to search the wolf, the boy says they should take a look at it. The system then notifies them that upon successfully hunting the wolf, it is recommended to consume its essence. Lee asks the girl if she wants to eat it, to which she responds that she will leave it for him. The protagonist thinks that she had a very weak stomach, and after that, he consumes the essence. At that moment, something apparently changes in the protagonist's body. The system informs that he now has immunity to 10,000 poisons and has tolerance to all poisons that exist in the tower. Meanwhile, the girl is watching everything from a distance, thinking that she can't believe he actually ate that. She says that not only did he find the blood wolf in such a large map so quickly, but he was also able to identify its characteristics. She asks what kind of ability Lee has, and he thinks that she is probably talking about what he did earlier. Coming up with an excuse, our hero says that it is the authority of the Great Assassin Star. Hearing this, the girl apparently believes him, and Lee thinks that this is very convenient. Changing the subject, he asks if she's okay. He mentions that since the 10th floor failed to become the Day of Blood, it will be harder to meet the required quota of player deaths. The duty of an Assassin Star is to reduce the number of players. Because of that, each Assassin Star must meet an individual quota of player deaths, and if they fail to do so within the time limit, they will receive a penalty. The fact that she still agreed with his choices despite that made it clear that an Assassin Star was very valuable. Then the girl says that she won't die just from receiving a penalty, so everything will work out somehow. Right after, the system appears, informing that all the dead have been exterminated and the mission of that floor has come to an end. The scene cuts to the gladiator lobby, where the red-haired boy says that that guy was killed by a mere kobold. After that, the boy starts crying. Lee, meanwhile, is watching everything from a distance, thinking that although the monsters they faced might have been weak, some had to face their families. Some faced their lovers, and others even had to face their own friends. Everyone was forced to accept the death of their loved ones and had to say goodbye with their own hands. That's why it can be said that this was the cruelest floor so far. The other boy then tells everyone to cheer up, because those who made it to Lee must continue living until they reach the end of the tower. Standing up, the brown-haired boy says that the other is right, and they can't just stop moving now, because at that very moment, they were completely alive. Hearing that, the protagonist is surprised but agrees with everything, thinking that if someone had given up on the mission, no one would have been able to return, but everyone left their regrets behind. They continued to grow much stronger in the future as they trusted each other. Right after, that voice appears again, informing that the mission of the 10th floor will begin soon. Additionally, it would be experimenting with other dimensions, and all players will receive a designated area. Moreover, it will be assigned to the world of Morin. In this dimension, a war is currently taking place between the Orthodox and non-Orthodox factions, along with a demonic faction, and they will be assigned to one of those factions. The group, meanwhile, is analyzing the mission, and the brown-haired boy says that he has heard about them in webtoons. Lee, realizing that he will be going to the world of Morin, wonders if it is his master's hometown. And if the world is the same as his master's, then he will probably be able to meet him again. He only managed to learn the sword technique in a hurry because he didn't have much time. However, if he can meet his master again, he might be able to take his technique to a much higher level. Right after, the system asks them to select the faction they wish to join, and Lee thinks that the place he is going to has already been decided. After a short discussion, Jun, Oh, and Si Chang went to the Orthodox faction. Se Young and the other two went to the non-Orthodox faction, and Lee, along with Suyan and the healer, went to the demonic cult. Looking to the side, Lee seems somewhat uncomfortable, thinking that there are some people who are not very happy with the world they were assigned to. The system informs that the mission of the 10th floor is about to begin, and they must survive for a certain period of time within their faction. At that moment, the three of them are teleported to another location. And so the system begins to inject the necessary memories for their current mission. Lee thinks that this place is the Celestial Demon Divine Sect of his master. From that day on, they were cadets of the Celestial Demon Divine Sect and were undergoing the test known as the Path of the Celestial Demon. Suyan, observing her surroundings, realizes that there are martial artists mixed in with the players. Lee, in turn, thinks that the energy of the cadets there is no joke, and each one of them is at least an advanced player or higher. And among these people, there is one whose energy makes them completely untouchable. At that moment, a man begins to speak, saying that it is a pleasure to meet all the young ones. He mentions that he is the chief examiner of the Path of the Celestial Demon, and that his name is Taemujung. Lee thinks that Taemujung is the examiner of this test and one of the two elders of the Celestial Demon cult. He withdrew from the front lines 7 years ago, but his palm techniques are known for having crushed all his enemies, making him one of the strongest martial masters within the cult. The old man says that the Celestial Path has 5 trials, and those who give up before the 3rd will become slaves of the divine cult, so they must be sure to stay focused. He mentions that the beginning of the Celestial Path serves to filter out the trash. Right after, the man calls for cadet number 1 to give it his all. Without wasting time, the young man draws his sword but is easily thrown aside. Showing no mercy, the old man says that he is trash. After that, he calls for the next cadet to step forward. Lee thinks that the first test of this guy is to evaluate each cadet one by one, and after that, it is common knowledge that the number of slaves in the cult increases. The other girl says that it wouldn't be a bad idea to give up now because they would eventually return to the tower, so they could simply live as slaves for the time being. Observing the situation, Lee says that it could be a way to do things as the condition for completing the mission is just to survive, asking her if she wants to give up, live, and experience slavery. But it was obvious that the girl did not want that. At that moment, the old man appears, saying that they dared to chatter while the sacred path of the celestial demon was in progress. Because of that, they were probably asking for a challenge. Time passes, and the old man asks the girl for her name, to which she responds that her name is Xiuyan. The old man tells her to forget her name from now on because she will have no need for it anymore. Lee thinks that the man assumes she will probably become a slave, and it didn't seem like he intended to go easy on her at all. She had never properly held a sword in her life, wondering if she would be able to pass the first test. Without wasting time, the old man tells her to stand still and just go for it already. Hearing that, the girl becomes very irritated and then charges at the old man, who easily defends against the attack, thinking that there is no technique in her attack since she is just swinging the sword. At that moment, the man is surprised because he ends up getting shot. Everyone in the sect is shocked by what just happened because the man actually took an attack. Watching everything from a distance, Lee wonders how the girl will deal with the consequences of using a firearm in the world of Morin. And while she was shooting, she was basically shouting that she came from another world. After that, the old man grabs the girl by the neck, asking if that was supposed to be a technique that tickles. Even so, it wasn't bad, saying that she had passed the test. Lee thinks that now he understands why they probably couldn't see the weapon, and that the tower filtered it to make it appear as though she was firing energy using her finger for the people of that world. That's why Lee feels relieved, because it seems that there are cases where being reckless can actually work. Right after, a girl says that judging by his smile, she thinks he enjoys watching her suffer. Our hero replies that it's not like that, and the girl tells him that he can keep smiling, because now it was Lee's turn. Time passes again, and the scene cuts to Lee in the middle of his evaluation. Thinking that now that he is right in front of him, he feels as if he is standing before a massive mountain. He is not as powerful as his master, but to an ant, it doesn't matter whether it's a tiger or a wolf. Both are equally untouchable. Noticing that the protagonist is standing still, the old man asks if Lee plans to fight using only his eyes. Starting to move, Lee thinks that he will begin by testing the waters. He then launches an attack at the old man, who easily dodges it. Not giving up, the boy unleashes a series of strikes, but the old man manages to evade all of them. Lee wonders why this sensation feels so familiar, as if asking himself whether such stiff sword techniques could do anything against him. And at that moment, it feels as if he can hear his master's voice. Observing the protagonist, the old man thinks that he isn't bad, but there's nothing special about him, so it's time to put an end to this. Meanwhile, Lee is concentrating, thinking that the man is a monster capable of overpowering Sueyan with a single attack, and testing the waters was useless from the start. Even if his existence is as insignificant as a mere firefly, he is still the successor of the celestial demon. And you must not forget that as long as he is in the celestial demon cult, he must prove himself. The old man, meanwhile, seems to notice something different. At that moment, the protagonist leaps forward, charging at the man, using the celestial demon's successor spirit ability. The old man, observing that sword technique, seemingly knows where it comes from. The scene cuts to some time after that with the protagonist walking, apparently deep in thought about something. The scene cuts back to the battle, where Lee is about to strike the old man. At that moment, the old man dodges the attack, but his hat is torn to shreds. Immediately afterward, he manages to immobilize the protagonist, saying that he has passed. Returning to the present, Lee thinks that he wasn't able to land a hit in the end, but he is still happy that he passed the first test. Even so, he is curious about why the old man called him at such a late hour. Sometime later, the scene cuts to inside the old man's house, where he says that Lee's inner energy level is pathetic. While listening to the explanation, Lee thinks that the man is saying this as if he has complete control over him. It's making him uneasy, assuming that he will be failed simply because his inner energy is lacking. Magic power is known as inner energy here, and it increases as one levels up. Frustrated, he thinks that the level up penalty, which he once thought gave him an unfair advantage, is actually what is holding him back here. Then the old man begins to analyze the protagonist's body, saying that there is something very strange. His energy channels are not blocked, and in fact, his body seems to have the perfect constitution for accumulating inner energy. Thinking that he recognizes that sword technique, but is highly unlikely to be true, since the Supreme One has never taken any disciples. Most importantly, there is no way the Supreme One would accept someone with so little inner energy as his own disciple. Even so, there is the possibility that he is a disciple that the Supreme One has kept hidden all this time, who will eventually become the heir to the Celestial Demon, someone whom all followers of the Celestial Demon divine cult would admire, and whom the 10,000 mountains would revere. In the next test, people with little energy will not pass, and at this rate, the boy could become a slave, even if he has the potential to be the celestial demon's successor. Lee says that the old man seems very tired and asks if he may leave. The old man then opens a box, asking the protagonist to eat what's inside. It is a centennial snow ginseng, which will help him absorb energy, allowing him to gain 10 years worth of inner energy with ease. This is a gift for him, since he managed to surprise him with his sword technique, and so there should be no strange misunderstandings. Observing the herb, the protagonist is confused. As he begins to meditate, the old man instructs him to follow his guidance and circulate the energy throughout his body. Lee then begins to follow the old man's instructions, and a surge of energy seems to flow throughout his entire body. The old man says that this is the fundamental step of the Radiant Vitality sacred art. That's why he must not lose focus, asking if he wants to waste the elixir he just consumed. Lee thinks that not only did the old man give him an herb that grants 10 years of energy, but he is also using his most advanced cultivation technique. So he has no idea why the old man is giving him so many benefits, assuming it's because he left a deep impression on him with his sword technique. Either way, the reason doesn't matter, because he learned in the academy mission that rare opportunities must always be seized. Time passes once again, and the scene cuts to the demonic divine sect during lunchtime, where the cadets who passed the first test are present. Some are training alone, while others are resting before the second test begins. The yellow-haired girl says that she thought all the other players were disqualified, and Lee responds that just because they were disqualified doesn't mean they're dead. At that moment, the protagonist is suddenly attacked but manages to dodge it. Everyone in the sect, observing what just happened, is shocked as a massive hole appears in the wall. A voice speaks, saying that the weather is getting hotter and asking why they are in a place where they shouldn't be, calling the group riffraff, bastards, and outsiders. Our hero, realizing who it was, did not seem pleased, thinking that the guy's name was Muzhan of the Blood Tribe and both his lineage and martial ability were far superior. The man says that he has no idea how they managed to enter the divine cult, and another young man adds that this is not a place where mountain outsiders can do as they please. Right after, Suyeon comments that it seems there are some loudmouths around who are asking to die. The man asks what she just said, and Suyeon questions why he is asking again. Hearing all that, the blue-haired guy gets very irritated, stating that she has a very filthy mouth. At that moment, the girl draws her weapon, saying that she was wondering if he would still be talking all that nonsense after his head disappeared. The man responds that he is also curious, wondering if her figure technique would be faster than his sword. Then the protagonist arrives at the scene to interrupt the fight, saying that nothing good comes from causing trouble while walking the path of the celestial demon, thinking that they would probably lose if they fought now, and although it was frustrating, it was better to wait for a better opportunity. For the rest of the tests, he needed to gain more energy, whether by training or by obtaining more of those rare opportunities. Right after, the blue-haired man says that the girl is quite beautiful despite not knowing her place. Because of that, he had already made a decision, that after the test is over, he would choose her to be directly under his command. Additionally, she should look forward to it, because taming beasts with terrible personalities was his specialty. Up until that moment, the protagonist had been holding back. However, upon hearing all of that, he became extremely enraged. The old man appears, ordering everyone to return to their positions. Laughing, the blue-haired guy says that they would meet again very soon. Time passes again, and the old man says that this day will become a great turning point in their lives. The cadets who pass the test will learn advanced martial arts in the world of cultivation. Lee thinks that it was already hot before they even started, and now it's getting even hotter because of that other guy. Feeling proud that he managed to hold himself back and not punch that guy in the face at that moment. Shortly after, a man starts distributing water bottles to the disciples. Lee, for his part, feels much better now after drinking water. But that apparently wasn't just water, it was something different. Lee, however, already knew what it was. After that, the test finally begins, and the objective is to purify the poison they just drank using their inner energy. The old man then begins observing each disciple, thinking that while he gave Lee a push, he wasn't sure if that was enough for him to pass the test. The system then appears to Lee, informing him that his 10,000 poison immunity has been activated. The old man, surprised, asks Lee if he really expelled all the poison, to which he responds yes, saying that since he was prepared in case something was in the water, he was able to expel the poison more easily. Thinking that what he obtained after consuming the Blood Wolf elixir on the 9th floor was a body immune to 10,000 poisons. Although he also gained the Radiant Vitality sacred art, he hadn't accumulated enough energy to expel a poison of this caliber. Still, he managed to pass the test without doing practically anything. The old man thinks that this is confusing because although he gave Lee an item before, one would need the inner energy of a first-class warrior to detoxify the poison at such speed. Even so, there was a small possibility, and it was possible that his talent had been chosen by the Supreme Lord, meaning that he could be his true disciple. Then Lee glances to the side, observing the other cadets, noticing that Muzhan also managed to complete the challenge. After that, the old man starts laughing, saying that the cadets in this group are quite impressive, and he never expected that the first and second place would be able to detoxify the poison so quickly. congratulating them on becoming official warriors of the divine cult and looking forward to seeing the performances they will showcase in the remaining tests. Right after, the blue-haired guy calls for the elder again, asking to be given another test, and that he wants to be tested with twice the amount of poison. Hearing that, the people of the sect are extremely shocked, since they were already struggling with just this amount of poison. Another leader asks how a mere cadet dares to make such a request, but the old man stops him, asking why he is making this request. The boy says that he feels he hasn't fully demonstrated what he is capable of and wants to prove his abilities again under better conditions. Beside the person who detoxified his poison first, thinking that he is called the future of the blood tribe and has been consuming elixirs regularly since his youth. Even so, that bastard's inner energy was inferior to his, and he couldn't believe it. Even with double the amount of poison, he could still detoxify it without a problem, and no matter what tricks Lee used, he wouldn't be able to do it again. The old man thinks that having a strong spirit is not a bad thing, but he has crossed the line, saying that there is no need for this. Surprisingly, the protagonist accepts the offer. However, he wishes to adjust the amount of poison slightly, making the man think that double the amount must have been too much for even Lee to handle. However, something unexpected happens because the protagonist actually wants to triple the amount of poison, leaving everyone shocked by what they just heard. Time passes again and Lee says that he is already done. Meanwhile, the blue-haired guy is struggling to detoxify the poison, in disbelief that Lee was able to do it so quickly, and that a worm like him was actually above him. He couldn't accept it. Right after, the man loses all his concentration. Before losing consciousness, the young man stares at Lee before collapsing to the ground. Lee thinks that this unexpected bonus match ended in his effortless victory, thanks to his 10,000 poison immunity. And because Mujin couldn't withstand the amount of poison, he was immediately transported to the medical hall and was fortunately saved. Additionally, his two companions completed their detoxification shortly afterward. Even so, the fate of the remaining cadets was decided as they became slaves. With that, the second test of the celestial demon path had already come to an end. The scene cuts to the next day with someone discussing a mystical creature, mentioning that it was so fast that they couldn't catch it, even using mobility arts. Lee, overhearing the conversation from a distance, thinks that the creature is taller than a human and jumps around like a rabbit, and the young man has apparently already figured out what the creature is, assuming that it really could be his pet, because earlier he had told it not to be within anyone's line of sight. Meanwhile, someone is lying in bed beside those men. It is revealed to be Mujin, who asks where they saw that mystical creature. The other guy responds that he spotted it last night. After that, the scene cuts to nighttime with another man showing where he saw the creature. Then the blue-haired man takes out a flower from a box, saying that it is an extremely rare item. The other man asks if the powerful chief of the tribe is going to use it, and the blue-haired man says that he will place it where it belongs after capturing the mystical creature, thinking that the essence of a mystical creature contains an immense amount of refined energy, far greater than most elixirs, which don't even dare to compare. If he can absorb the energy of such a creature, he will be able to restore his reputation as the strongest of the younger generation in the blood tribe. Meanwhile, an unknown creature is watching the entire group. It is revealed that Lee was also there, listening to the entire plan of the man. Beside his kangaroo, the protagonist says that it's quite hot, asking why he should rejuvenate his body a little. Time passes again, and the four men appear to be meditating near that flower. The kangaroo is watching them from a distance, and Lee behind a tree is seemingly planning something. Our hero makes a hand signal and the kangaroo immediately moves forward. After that, it rushes toward the flower, and the other man notices it. Without hesitation, he charges at the kangaroo, wielding his sword. For the kangaroo, this was already planned as it manages to snatch the flower, and Lee immediately after uses his ability to recall the kangaroo, successfully taking the elixir as well. Leaving the man completely confused by what had just happened, Lee stealthily begins to leave the area, saying that the kangaroo did a great job. Observing the item he had taken, he wonders if this is an extremely valuable elixir. The kangaroo, meanwhile, is staring at the item. Lee, handing it to his pet, says that it will be good for its body, so it should make sure to eat all of it. Lee thinks that consuming consecutive elixirs of similar potency will result in diminished effectiveness, so it's better to give it to the kangaroo, saying that it will help it circulate its energy, so it should absorb all of it. Right after, Lee begins using the Radiant Vitality Sacred Art, wondering what is happening with the immense amount of mana. Realizing that even though it consumed the snow flower, it felt as though it had eaten the same item Lee ingested before. At that moment, an immense light begins to surround the kangaroo. Lee, in turn, is thrown back by the force of the light, feeling completely stunned by what was about to happen, thinking that this was something he had only heard about, because his pet was simply undergoing a body transformation, where it seemed like its entire physical form had changed. Then the kangaroo leaps forward, saying that it feels like it's overflowing with energy. Lee wonders why elixirs work so well on it, assuming that it really is a mystical creature, thinking that if its appearance changed due to body refinement, that must mean something happened to its smaller form, or maybe it had even gotten more muscular. Without wasting time, our hero asks his pet to shift into its smaller form, and when it does, the protagonist is relieved as nothing seemed to have changed. Actually, something had changed. It looked like it had gained more fat around its belly, wondering what kind of logic this is. Regardless, the awakened kangaroo is a huge and unexpected harvest. Even so, he can't summon it while walking the celestial demon path, but he is excited to fight alongside it in the future. Sometime later, the scene cuts to another location. A man says that they are no longer cadets and are now official warriors of the celestial demon divine cult. With the upcoming third test of the celestial demon path, they will receive a special opportunity. Opening a large door, he announces that for the next 4 days, they will have access to the third floor of the demonic god's archive. They will be able to learn any martial arts manual from the third floor for those 4 days. However, they are strictly forbidden from copying them. Lee, meanwhile, observes the situation from afar, thinking that based on his memories, the lower-ranked manuals could even be learned by slaves, while high-ranking mobility arts were studied even by the cult leader himself. From what he knew, the third test of the celestial demon path was an arena battle, where they would choose an opponent to fight against. The fact that they were being given access to the third floor meant there was a high chance that mobility arts would play a crucial role in the fight. At that moment, the blue-haired man bumps into the protagonist, saying that Lee seems too relaxed and should enjoy it while he can, because when the third test begins, it will be the last time he gets to feel this at ease. Lee, meanwhile, wonders if that guy intends to choose him as his opponent. Even though he has embarrassed himself until now, he still has more inner energy than Lee. That's why the mobility art he learns for the third test will be even more important. At that moment, the system appears, informing that star ratings will be assigned to the books on the third floor of the demonic god archive. Right after that, several stars begin to appear, defining the rank of each book. Lee then feels relieved, thinking that the guide had perfect timing for this task. Observing the blonde-haired girl, the protagonist thinks that she somehow seems more motivated since the 9th floor. However, when he looks at her book, he notices that all of them have bad ratings. Approaching her, Lee comments that she has been working hard, and she says that she must train diligently whenever there's a chance to get stronger, because she wants to be capable of helping him and their teammates. Hearing that, Lee is surprised. Right after, he suggests that she pick a different book called Moonlit Stroll, which has the highest star rating among the books in that section. After that, the girl takes the book, saying that although his reason for recommending it isn't convincing, listening to him never hurts. And the protagonist tells her not to worry about it, since he was just trying to help. Meanwhile, someone is watching the two from afar. It is revealed to be Soo Yeon, who has apparently already chosen her book. Time passes, and while Lee is searching for his book, that girl appears. Approaching the protagonist, she seems like she wants to say something. Then she asks him to choose a book for her as well, leaving the young man confused about what had just happened. 4 days pass after that event, and the third test of the celestial demon path finally begins. The rules are quite simple. They only need to face their opponent and win. However, if they fall from the wooden pillars mounted in the arena, they will be disqualified. So they must make good use of the mobility art they learned from the demonic god archive. After the explanation, all the cadets begin approaching the arena. Lee thinks that the type of mobility art they learned will be a key factor in passing this trial. Without wasting time, the blue-haired man leaps into the air, landing on one of the pillars. Drawing his sword, he calls out to Lee, challenging him to fight. Moments later, Lee was already above that arena, about to start his duel. The one with blue hair says that the life he has had until now has been very boring. Even all the new generation talents from other blood tribes were too weak for him. Thinking that the path of the celestial demon would serve as a pastime, and after easily passing the tests and becoming the best cadet, he was able to obtain good things. But there was something different from all his expectations. All of this because a trash like him appeared out of nowhere. Thanks to him, he is filled with a strong desire he had never felt before in his life. At the same moment, the guy moves behind the protagonist, and when he strikes, he says that he had the desire to defeat him. Moments later, Lee apparently managed to dodge the attack. Even so, he ended up being hit by part of it, thinking that it is a refined technique that even cuts water droplets, and it was just one attack, but he could feel it very well, because that guy is really very powerful. Despite that, one thing was already clear. A flashback appears in his mind with the guy saying that taming beasts with terrible personalities was his forte. After that, the two leap and a protagonist says he will throw him to the ground. Moments later, a sword battle was taking place between the two. The guy asks if that was all he had, mentioning that he thought he had done a trick in the second trial. That's why he will say something to make him despair. Because the mobility art he learned in the Demon God's archive was created by one of the 12 Supremes, where the name of the ability was the Four Gods' Steps. Our hero, meanwhile, pondered over that name, because when he found that book, it had 4 stars in total. The guy is already talented and strong due to his lineage, but even so, he was lucky, and that's why the world is very unfair. Even so, what had happened was a relief because his ability was far superior to his. Although he had already imagined that when he saw the name Shadowless Step, the more he familiarized himself with it, the more certain he became about something. Because he is sure that the person who wrote the book Shadowless Step is definitely his master. The guy, surprised, asks if he found a decent mobility art that was hidden somewhere. A flashback of his master appears, and the protagonist thinks that now he understands what he had said before, because the shadowless step ability is the foundation of the sword technique of his skill, and that was definitely a stage that his master had prepared. All of this had been drawn in the second half of the shadowless step manual. Meanwhile, the one with blue hair was attacking the protagonist, who was dodging all the attacks. Meanwhile, he was mocking the guy, saying that the freshwater shrimp is an incredible fish that can eat up to 1,000 mosquito larvae in a day. Confused, the guy asks what he is talking about, and irritated, he lunges at the protagonist again, who was managing to dodge all his attacks. Moments later, the guy was already quite exhausted. Lai thinks that while he is in a fierce offensive, its attack flow is not smooth. The Four Gods Steps is a mobility art that requires true value on flat terrain and can only display up to 70% of its abilities in that stage. Next, Lee approaches the guy and then throws a kick. Drawing his sword, he thinks that this was practically his territory, managing to strike the guy. At the same moment, he falls to the ground and the victory is finally given to the protagonist. The guy, desperate, thinks that technique was terrifying. After that battle, Lai was relieved, wondering if he had really won. Sueyan, meanwhile, was watching the battle from below. Giving a hand signal, Lai thinks that he had done well. Sueyan, surprised, wonders if that idiot had chosen a good book just for himself. Right after, the announcer grants victory to Lai, informing that whoever is next should choose their opponent immediately. The old man, observing the protagonist, thinks that at that moment he might be feeling something, or perhaps witnessing the beginning of the next Supreme Lord. After that battle, time passes and several people were fighting to decide the winner. Lai thinks that the 10th floor could have been the Day of Blood, but instead it turned into a floor where he gained a lot. Sueyan took advantage of her strength as a long-range attacker and won the battle easily. And the ability, whose name is Arcane Attack, had been her highlight in the battle, as it had reached another level when she picked up her book. However, there was still one thing he was curious to see: the development of that other girl. Although there are many opponents stronger than her, the girl is exceptionally quick at thinking on her feet. But moments later, Lai is surprised by something, as the girl was defeated in a matter of seconds. Without wasting time, the protagonist approaches to help her and then looks to the side to see who had done this. And an unknown man was standing atop that pillar. If one were to ask who the strongest cadet among all those who participated in the test was, it would be Jo Mujin, the future of the Blood Tribe. The protagonist, who also had a crushing victory over the guy, was also considered one of the strongest. However, most cadets remembered one more name, the first son of the Blade Tribe, and his name was Hoyan. Sometime later, the scene cuts to the Cultivation Medicine Hall, and Lai thinks that the girl encountered the worst opponent of all. At that moment, the girl had apparently regained consciousness, and realizing that she had lost the battle, she says that Lai even went through the trouble of recommending a book. After that, the protagonist starts picking up a cloth, saying that her opponent was simply too strong, and that she shouldn't be disappointed, instead focusing only on her recovery. He mentions that she was just an employee in a normal office not long ago, and being able to stand on equal footing with people who fight for a living is already impressive. Frustrated, Sueyan tells him not to be deceived by that smooth talk, as the protagonist chose the best book for himself. Hearing that, the protagonist is left speechless, and they start a discussion to see if that was true. The girl then starts laughing, saying that Lai is usually composed and reliable, so it's kind of refreshing to see him flustered. Even so, it was fine because she really liked the book that Lai had given her. She also couldn't rely on the boy forever. She tells both of them to do their best in the remaining challenges because she will also train hard in her own way until they return to the tower. Hearing all that, the protagonist remains silent, thinking that it was something the girl would definitely say. It would have been good if she had passed the test, but now she will be able to make the most of her time even if she is alone. That said, he wanted to know what happened with that guy afterward. The third test of the Celestial Demon Path was completed the next day. A total of 38 fights took place and only half remained. Moments later, the scene cuts to Tamu Jung's office. After the third test ended, they immediately announced the contents of the next one, where the fourth test would be assassination. Selecting a target from the list of names, preparing completely for 15 days, and completing the assassination would be the requirements to pass to the next test. At that moment, the system appears, informing that the probability of Lai successfully assassinating someone had already been calculated. And in that paper, the probability of each one being assassinated had already been revealed. Right after, that old man calls the protagonist again, saying that the person who obtains first place will be given the sacred object of the divine cult as a reward. Lai thinks that if it is called a sacred object, it must be like a treasure. He mentions that the most important thing to consider in the fourth test is the target one chooses, because if someone chooses an easy target, they will be able to pass, but they won't learn anything. The other side of the coin is that if they choose a difficult target, they will definitely die. That's why Lai was wondering what kind of opponent he needed to face to get first place. As he begins to analyze, he realizes that the probability is 30%, noting that it is a bit too high, since Huiyan would probably choose a target with a probability of 20% or less. Even so, it would be risky to choose someone with less than 10% since nothing would matter if he ended up being killed. Meanwhile, the old man was watching what the protagonist was doing. Thinking that the trial had begun, he wondered what Lai would do. That said, our hero had already chosen his opponent, saying that he would like to select Mayhap Jung from the unorthodox Red Death sect. Lai says that guy doesn't see people as humans and as the type of person who should not be allowed to roam freely. That's why trash like that must be taken care of. However, that person's probability was only 1%. The old man in turn says that he's being very reckless, asking what probability he thought he had of assassinating that guy. Our hero responds that it could be 10%, and the old man replies that it is not, and even if he does his best, it will likely be much lower than that, asking if he will still go ahead, saying that he is throwing himself into this game even knowing what will happen in the future. Hearing this, Lee says that just because there is a low probability does not mean it is impossible, and if his path is on fire, he simply must put out the flames. If his path is full of thorns, the only thing he must do is cut them all down. That's why he will do whatever it takes to walk the way he wants. To ensure you don't miss the next part, activate the notification bell and see you next time on Tob's channel.